vinner sjalkudio, sjaknegeruven, zombie-ho-mi-ho, skipper-ho-mi-ho, så sjaknegeruven, ho-mi-ho-mi-ho, skipper-ho-mi-ho, så sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, 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 sjaknegeruven, ho-mi-ho-mi-ho, skipper-ho-mi-ho, så sjaknegeruven, ho-mi-ho-mi-ho, skipper-ho-mi-ho, så sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, så sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, så sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, så sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, så sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio, skåre vinner sjalkudio, 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 sjaknegeruven, sjalkudio,
Hello. Hello?
Hi.
This is Shane. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sweet. Thanks.
Aislinn. Good. How about you?
Hey, Hawk, just to note, you're kind of quiet. Oh, there we go. I can hear you. Okay, yeah, I'm used to you being just too loud, so it threw me off.
Hi. Hi. I think I was told to come to this meeting, or Oh, my name is Dina. I'm a volunteer, I think. Or yeah, no. Yeah. I think it was John. I think we talked about the like artist for the live show, but also like potentially being like a GM of some sort. Okay. Okay. Mostly the artist, but I can GM as well. Hmm. Yes. Thank you. I've looked at like the website and I think I've seen that movie, but I haven't been given any links. Okay.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to RPG Research. I'm your host, Hawk Robinson, president and founder of RPG Research. And we are today doing on our weekly GM's workshops and training. This is a theory day, RPG theory day. So we alternate each week from theory one week to applied gaming the next week. And so it's a theory day. And tomorrow will be as well. And joining us over Jitsi, we have, let's see, at the top of my list here, I've got Aislinn. Say hello, Aislinn.
Hi.
Who recently joined us just a couple weeks ago, right? And you are a GM trainee. Are you also a researcher or just GM trainee?
I think I'm both.
Okay, which is great. Not a problem. And then also joining us, who's been with us a few months now, is Shane. Hello, Shane.
Hello, how are we doing today?
Okay, how about yourself?
Good. I will be kind of rearranging while we're talking here, just so you know, so you might need to say my name twice to get my attention.
Okay, just make sure you mute your mic when you're doing that so we
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have all the background noise. Okay, great.
Yeah, my headset, when I flip the mic up, it goes mute, so.
Okay, good. And then also brand new is joining us is Dina. Welcome, Dina.
Thank you.
And Dina, you're training as a game master trainee and also as a live stream artist, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome aboard. I have not met you before since you were interviewing with John, so I'm glad you're able to make it here. So we have been doing the last couple episodes what's called activity analysis, which is really understanding all of the components and considerations that go into an activity. We're using drum circles as an example because it was a fairly simple activity that can be broken down, and we were using that to walk everybody through the process of doing an activity analysis in preparation for doing activity analysis of role-playing games. And we were today going to start doing the role-playing game breakdown, but 3 of the people who have been involved in that so far are gone for the holiday. So we're going to go ahead and postpone that today. We might resume that tomorrow if attendance is better. Otherwise, if they're still gone for the holiday, we'll pick it up at the next theory session. So, Shane, if you can hear me, Shane?
Yep, I'm here.
Let me run by, since you're the most senior out of this group that's here today, have we covered with you yet Tuckman small group communication and formation theory related to role-playing games? Like forming, storming, norming, performing.
I think mostly we have kind of gone at it in relation to other things we were currently doing, but I don't think we've really gone over, the theory part of it itself as.
So you've heard it mentioned, but you haven't been through the actual lecture.
Yeah, we've only had like a piece here and a piece there.
Okay.
And like whenever it's been brought up, you've explained that particular part of it as
Right.
it applies to what we're doing.
Okay.
So
Yeah, so you have not been through that lecture, because the lecture we go through all of them great depth. It's not super exciting, but it'll all make a lot more sense in relationship to role-playing gaming once it's there, and then you'll know what I'm talking about instead of my having to explain it every time. And Aislinn, I believe I have some of those videos already up there, but I'm going to just double check. You have not watched one of the videos, the lectures I did on forming, storming, norming, or is this something you already know? I think maybe you mentioned you actually know that all.
I'm familiar with it, but a refresher is always good.
Well, okay. I will start a little bit of quizzing you, but let me jump to Dina. Dina, are you at all familiar with the terminology forming, storming, norming, performing?
Not really.
Okay. So that is based on some terminology by Brad Tuckman from the 1960s. On his studies, and he did large, like huge sample sizes here of what groups go through as they come together. Now, usually, this is specific to small groups. Large groups go into another field of study. This is specific to small groups and defining what a small group is versus a large group, and all of the social dynamics that happen in a group as they first come together, as they try to figure out who does what, as they try to normalize those functions, and then finally, for the groups that do well, get to this performing phase, which is an important aspect of our flow theory discussions. Now, Dina, you've probably not heard yet about our flow theory discussions. Aislinn, I believe you have, correct? You've at least seen the 10-minute video I did?
Yeah, I did.
Good. And Shane, you've heard this many times as far as flow theory, right? You've already been through that.
yeah, we've discussed it both like peripherally and like a deep dive discussion of what all goes into flow state.
Okay. Did you watch the 10-minute video yet?
I'm pretty sure I have, because
Good.
as far as I know, I've watched all the videos you had posted that we were supposed to watch.
Okay. So I don't have to go over flow theory at this point. Dina, as you get onboarded, as you get your email account set up, you will get links to our backend intranet, which will then give you access to all of the videos and training checklists that you can go through and kind of check it off at your own while you attend these once a week. So that way you can be brought up to speed on terminology. Very briefly for you and for anybody watching the stream, flow state is a very deep level of immersion. It's considered an ideal state for learning and for enjoyment. Reason why it's so important for role-playing gaming, you often hear people talk about when they have a really good session, that they lose track of time. They'll look up and 2 hours went by and it felt like half an hour. And this is also in sports known as being in the zone. And it's an interesting phenomenon. And the Hungarian psychologist, positive psychologist, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, it's spelled in a really funky way, is the main advocate for this theory. You can check out, there's a 2004 TED Talk where he talks about it. And then also I have a 10-minute video on YouTube talking about flow state related to role-playing games with some excerpts from the gamers' movies, etc. So one of the things about Tuckman's theory related to forming, storming, norming, performing, so that's small group formation and communication, is that it's harder to have a flow state experience unless you're reaching certain levels of group dynamics. When you have a disruptive group, it's hard for people to enjoy the game and get into it and get that right level of challenge, that they have high levels of immersion and the potential for flow state. And one of our main goals with our research and with our community programs is to try to optimize the role-playing game experience so that players get the deepest immersion possible and as many opportunities for flow state as possible. Because what we find is, and we can observe when they're in a high level of immersion through their body language, etc., when their immersion scores are high and they report having flow state experiences, then their feedback of how much they enjoyed the game scores can be very high. So on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being their best experience of a game in life, they're much more likely to report 8, 9, 10 if they've had flow state experiences and high levels of immersion. So that's why it's any of the variables that can affect that, and there are many. I have a whole small book basically developing on all the things that affect optimizing the role-playing game experience. But one of the big ones is this group formation and communication. So it sounds like that's what we need to go through today for you guys, since you're the ones here today. Grab my book that I like to read heavily. This. Settled in for the video, so. While I'm looking for it, Aislinn, you want to give me a summary of what you understand about Tuckman, just to see where, so I have an idea of where you're at currently?
Yeah, well, I know that the first step is forming, as in like forming a group, which is like the start of a game where you get all the characters together. The second step is storming, which is generally conflict and trying to figure out who's the leader of the group. The third step is norming. Is that correct?
Yes.
Norming, where everything just starts to become normal. Everybody settles into their elected position in the group. Performing is performing whatever task you've given them in their new roles. And then adjourning,
Yes.
which is ending the game.
Okay. Close. You've got the general idea. There's a few pieces off, but that's okay. We'll go through all of it. So, as far as that summary goes, you basically have it right as far as forming, and you basically have it right as far as storming. Norming is where everybody has to. Hey, Dan. So this will be a review for you, Dan, but for them it's all new. We're doing. Yep. So we'll let you cover a lot of it yourself. See how help you refresh it.
Okay.
So, norming is more where everybody has to spell out what their roles are. It's a very explicit process. Whereas at the performing stage, it's much more, there's more automaticity where people are more automatically doing their roles. So for example, in a role-playing game context, a norming group would say, well, you're the fighter, you should be the tank, you should be out in front, except for when we're walking for traps. Then we have the thief out front, and you have to talk it all out. When you get to the performing phase, everybody just does it. The thief knows to automatically check for traps before, around the door. and then the fighter knows to automatically kick it in, and the wizard knows to to be ready to have his whatever spell ready, and everybody just knows it automatically and just declares to the DM, I do this, 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 and this, and they don't have to coordinate with each other because they've done it so many times. So it's like an elite, like ATF or something, right? They don't have to. They just got to tap each other and say go and such. They've trained so many times; it's all very automatic, and they work together as a cohesive whole. That's the performing phase of Tuckman's theory. And when you're in performing phase, when it's all automatic like that, that's your greatest chance for a flow state experience, right? Because you're at your optimum peak ability, and if the challenge is just right, where it's pushing you just a little beyond what you think you can handle, but not too much anxiety, it can be a really amazing thing. And that's when you have groups that just go, wow, I love gaming with this group, etc. So, and then adjourning was correct. That's when the group ends. And then there's also reforming, which is a slightly different dynamic. Now, adjourning and reforming were added in later years. So, and again, originally these theories are built from business concepts for project management and things like that, where you bring a bunch of talented people together, you give them a project to work on, finish the project, they go away. And then they might come back together, and it might be all the same people, or it might be some of the same people with one or two different people. And there's that reforming process that you have to go through, which is different than the first time you formed when none of you knew each other. So that's why they've added those two other variants to it. But the core of it is forming, storming, norming, performing. And this really is strongly relevant to role-playing gaming. So, and you will look at your gaming groups completely differently as you learn these concepts. So welcome, Dan. Glad you could get it. We canceled this evening game because so many people were on holiday. We also need to look at other artists. I'm bummed. I wanted to continue it, but we had at least 3 people. So next week we'll probably have a full crew. So I'm going to jump through. I've got a lot of little highlighted sections here on this topic. Before I do, questions about what I've said so far, knowing though that I'm going to go a lot deeper, but anything that's occurred to you that popped into your head. I'll start with you, Aislinn.
I don't have anything.
Okay, Shane.
Well, just like a real quick anecdote from the Wednesday group at Uncle's. It's kind of funny because this group has been pretty much the same group of people playing for a while. They're all really super new to the game. And it was funny because even though they've been playing together for a while, it was almost like they forgot everything when they had this really new difficult encounter. But by the end, because there's normally all that meta discussion, about halfway through the encounter, things were getting really intense. They weren't like having these group meetings anymore. They were just jumping in, doing their thing. And so it was kind of like a short, quick thing where they went through the entire process, got all the way up to performing, and they were getting into a point where I thought the whole group was going to die. And then just by jumping in and having a feel for each other, they managed to pull it out and actually had a glorious victory. It was really cool. So just neat thing that I saw this Wednesday.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Though we talk about this in phases, as with all things psychological and social, they are not in nice, neat little closed compartments. We don't go from just forming and nothing else, and then all of a sudden you're in storming, and then all of a sudden you're in norming, and you never go back. You only move forward, right? That's not how human beings work. We create these theoretical constructs to try to explain the behaviors in a way that helps us have a conversation to then be able to further ourselves in whatever profession we're in, etc. Get better at what we're doing by creating terminology we understand. Let me take just a second here because Nicholas is here who's helping with the tech, and I need to give him some tasks to work on. Okay. Did you see the email first of all? Okay, so you saw the long to-do list there. So the next thing, so I just finished in that table area because you got to have that clear to work on systems, is the boxes that, don't worry about the 1U, 2U servers, but the sideways boxes and such. Go ahead, if they're not running, which I think only the Mist Heroes one is running, but the other one with all the hard drives and everything, go ahead and unplug all the cables from it and carefully take that out and put it over on the table because we're going to work on that. And then very carefully unplug all of the Ethernet cables that don't have a light, right? And just take those all out. we're going to clean up all that cabling so that it's not such a mess. And then, but leave the ones that have a light on for now. And then when our broadcast is over this evening, we're going to pull all of that, run it all clean, nice, proper. I've got the Velcro wraparound, stuff like that. We're going to do a proper cabling run. Stop streaming this evening. Okay. But that should get you started. And then that's when you're done with that, let me know and I'll give you some more stuff. Basically, the next thing would be to start tackling the wireframe shop. Get a lot of that crap. Because again, the point is to make it usable for you as a little workshop in there. So stuff. Right. Okay. I'm so glad Nicholas is here. We're getting so many things back on track here. All right. So let's see. We'll jump into. So Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot because you have been through this a few times, and start quizzing you, and then we'll go from there, explain it to others. So when I say a small group, what is the number of people that, according to Tuckman, that constitute a small group? Okay, the first part is correct. Yeah. The second part is more appropriate to role-playing gaming specifically, but according to Tuckman, the second part. So 3 to 9. So according to Tuckman's theory, we're going to get very specific about very specific terminology, and it's important so that we can move the dialogue forward. So when we say a small group, we are using Tuckman's definition of a small group of 3 to 9 participants. Now, other people have different attitudes about this. Goffman in 59 said it was the upper limit was in 20 to 25. Others have different sizes, but Tuckman argues that those are multiple groups. The social dynamics become multiple groups because you start to break into cliques and things like that. So we're really focusing on the small group here. To be a small group, it needs to be a range of 3 to 9. To be a group, the members must share a common goal or purpose. If they're all doing different things, they're not really a group. Meeting and communicating is a given medium is required. So these are all requirements to be a small group. Duration is also an important criterion, that there is a set duration, whether it's your game session, right? It might be a 3-hour game session, or, and it might just be one time, it might just be a one shot, or several sessions, multi-shot, or an ongoing campaign. These things usually need to be clear. Now, a team is a special type of small group and has to meet all of the definitions of a small group first. And to be a team, then they're also supposed to have complementary skills and be accountable for their actions, and they will disband when they've achieved their purpose or goal. Now, again, this is all in the business context of being assigned to work on a project. You're put together as a team to work on creating this new product or whatever it is, or software thing, whatever. And you're going to get, we need our DB. So I'm going to use software terminology because of my tech background. So you have a database administrator, you have your web developer, you have your middle logic, core developer, you have your project manager. You put them all together as this team, all working together from complementary skills. Now it might be you have 2 or 3 middleware developers and such, because maybe one of them's coming from Java and the other one's coming from C, and you're going to need both languages. So again, complementary skills. But the most important part, because I think the complementary skills in the context of role-playing game is actually overdone. Like you see all too often where everybody says, oh, our group must have a fighter, must have a magic user, must have a thief, and must have a cleric, right? Or a healer of some kind. And everybody says it, otherwise the group's just not well-rounded enough, blah, blah, blah. And I love to push that where you have a group of all thieves or all fighters or all bards, things like that. To kind of disprove that as an absolute requirement, because it's more about the individual skills than the class. And that's what it says here, complementary skills. So just something to be aware of. It is a trope that people have fallen into. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is what people assume. But the most important part of team is accountable. Right? You're working together as a team, and you're accountable for your actions and your team's results. Whether it's going and saving the village from the marauders, whatever it is, you as a team have become accountable. So in this case, we're talking about heroes, the party of heroes. But again, this book tends to emphasize from the business perspective that they must have complementary skills, and that certainly is an important part of going through the storming, norming, performing phase, in that if you have redundancies, that can make it a little harder to figure out who's going to do what. If you have two people with identical skill sets, what are you going to do about that? Problematic. Usually you have to then figure out different applications. So let's say they're both really good at their perception, and you get, they're two rangers. They're both really good. They have all the same skill set because they did all the same archetype choices out of the book, etc. And they're pretty much identical, same class, same race, same background, whatever. It happens sometimes. Yeah. But didn't know each other previously. Well, one of them you might say, oh, well, they're both really good perception, so you're going to take shift number 2 and you're going to take shift number 3, right?
Yeah.
So you find out a way to put those skills to some use in your... larger than small groups and teams is a network. Network is an interconnected system of things or people. That's very broad. You get into 3 dominant and recurring themes throughout with any kinds of groups, small groups, large groups, etc. Are ethos, logos, and pathos. These are Greek terms to describe a person, group, or a message. So ethos refers to the disposition, character, credibility, trustworthiness, or fundamental ethical values peculiar to a specific person, a group, or a message. We'll get into logos and pathos in a minute. But, this is the ethics and reputation of a group. So if you are a party, so in the Gamers 2, Shane, I know you've seen Gamers 2. Aislinn, have you watched Gamers 2? Darkness Rising?
No.
Okay, that's part of your to-do watch list, just so you know. It's part of your basic training. It's freely available. It's very entertaining. It's humorous. It's done with love from gamers about gamers.
What is it again?
Gamers
so 2, I can write it down.
Yeah, Gamers 2 Darkness Rising. It's in your training checklist.
Yeah, I'll remember it better if I write it down.
You bet. And it's freely available on the web. It's by Zombie Orpheus Entertainment and Dead Gentleman, which we have and in fact, their current fantasy network I helped build. Their streaming platform and such. So in Gamers 2 Darkness Rising, they're once again trying to play his campaign again through because they keep getting killed. The group just can't get past the storming phase, keeps screwing up, keeps getting killed, and they're not willing to give up. So they try to get new players to join their group, and they're only able to bring in one new player because they have a reputation, as they say. And it's because they say, yeah, you make one 9-year-old girl cry and nobody wants to join your group for some reason, right? So their ethos was not very good. These are an example of some not, unfortunately, you do see these types of gamers too often, but this is not a very good gaming group. They get better as the story progresses, thankfully. But they go through the many challenges that many gaming groups go through storming phase. So this is something relevant to that. Dan, do you have any comments or questions related to, again, disposition, character, credibility, trustworthiness, or the fundamental ethical values that are specific to this group?
Only that I'm trying to see a different right and see, because in Gamers 2, they had a certain reputation, but is their reputation always the same?
It's part of, so that's their credibility and trustworthiness. So their reputation, they develop the reputation because of their ethos. If they change their ethos, then once word gets around, then they would have a different reputation. So they have the reputation they have because of their ethos.
Okay, so driving force.
It's it's what affects their reputation because of their ethics and credibility. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Further comments, Shane?
Um, I guess the only thing is that sometimes, even though most of the group generally, I guess quote call them good people or whatever. One of the things that I picked up from gamers too is that a lot of them were kind of dragged along by the one who considered him an expert in all games.
The
And
rules
so,
warrior.
yeah, and the one who's sitting there doing that crazy meditation, citing stuff from the rule book while the guy beats on him.
Yes.
Not to be a spoiler, but anyway. But just the fact that sometimes, the whole group may not be that way, but the most obvious person within the group, basically one person can mess up the ethos of the group.
Yeah, dominant personalities. Yep. You bet. Aislinn, any comments?
No, this is all making pretty good sense to me so far.
Hey. And Dina, do you have any questions or comments so far?
Not really. No.
All right. So moving on, we have logos, which refers to their intellectual capacity of a specific group or the intellectual integrity. So this is, if you will, the logos kind of logic kind of builds on that, etc. But this is all. So we have the first one is ethos. You can think of ethics. Logos, you can think of logic and intellect. And so a group can be trustworthy and credible, their ethos, but may not be intellectually qualified to perform the task. For example, a racetrack pit crew is not intellectually qualified to do brain surgery, and a brain surgery team is not intellectually qualified to work on an auto racing team's pit crew. So it's having relevant skills and knowledge and background for what you're doing. With pathos, it's the degree of emotional arousal or emotional appeal of the group. So this emotional arousal can fire up a group as it does in team sports. And in almost any group, success leads to very positive emotions like happiness and joy, and negative emotions like sadness and fear can be debilitating to the group. And in some cases, these negative emotions can eventually lead so interestingly enough, sometimes these negative emotions can lead to group cohesiveness and working together more to try to overcome some of these negative challenges. Questions on logos and pathos related to? Yes.
I was thinking about like the logos. I'm thinking of ever watched the cartoon?
Oh yeah.
Rick has a horrible ethos.
Yes.
Yeah, but despite that, he is still universe.
Mm-hmm.
So intellectually, he's capable of doing.
Yeah.
No one wants to deal with.
Right.
You mentioned that possible for group to go through, come together.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me that a lot of people, we tend to misuse blood is thicker than water.
Mm-hmm.
Or not to filial blood, effectively the blood of the couple. Sure to
Mm-hmm.
that makes it a lot closer.
Yeah, being in the trenches together can really help bring a group together. Yeah, whether it's in a role-playing game that you survive a really tough, even a failure. Your group fails, you have a heavy loss.
Good suffering.
But exactly, yeah, you can commiserate and such. Nicholas, if you ever want to comment, you are welcome to. We're talking about is of interest to you. Okay, do you have a question on the server room? Go ahead.
So,
yes. So the bottom brown things are actually those aren't servers, those are actually intelligent switches from way back when.
okay.
I would leave those there for now for the weight distribution being at the bottom. So any of the rack mounts that are actually in the rack mount, like mounted, leave those.
Okay.
If they're not running and they're just sitting on top, even if they're rack mount, go ahead and pull them out. If they're not running. So there might be some rack mounts sitting on another rack. And slide those out because we got to go through and clean those up and test those. Yeah, if it's bolted, leave it. I already tested that one. Does run, so we don't need to pull that one. But pull the others, and we'll be checking those. All right. Shane, comments on ethos, logos, or pathos?
Yeah, but before I get to that, hey Dan,
Yes.
could you move closer to a mic because it's really hard to hear, bud.
Oh, you know what? We've got his other mic's not turned on. Sorry, we didn't. We had them all turned off because nobody else was here.
I'll try to project more.
I'll just turn on your mic. How's that? Good.
Oh, much better, yeah.
The cardioid.
Hear me now. Turn this
Yeah,
down
that's
responsive.
definitely better. So yeah, anyway, my comments, it's kind of funny because especially talking about adversity, bringing a group closer together. I already mentioned this to you, Hawk, but that day that I decided, based on an article I read, wasn't going to fudge dice rolls anymore, just let them fall where they lay. And if something bad happens to the players, well, that's the luck of it. And that was the day that I had that first thing where the character died very early in the session, failed his death saves and all that. And he was really cool about it because this was my own fault and everything. But that was the most animated post-session that I had ever seen that group. And since then, they kind of thrive on the, hey, we're almost going to die kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one of the things that has really helped them, both Norm and sometimes even Storm, because there is that sense of urgency that you have to pay attention, you have to work together. So
let me correct you on storming is when they're in chaos and not working together. Norming is when they're figuring out their roles. Performing is the ideal goal.
Yeah, that's the thing. They used to be mostly storming during the session.
Yeah.
And now I would say they are maybe just, hey, we're back together, 5 minutes tops. And then most of the session, they're norming. And I would say probably at least a quarter of what we got going on now, they're performing. They're working really well together. Great. And I think it all comes back to that thing where everything got real urgent because, holy crap, he's dead. We can't bring him back.
And you've heard me talk many times about it's actually the game gets much better for everybody once people know that your characters can actually die. And it's one of my complaints about a lot of the newer game systems that actually make it very difficult for characters to die, that I think they actually do a disservice to the enjoyment of the gamers by overly buffering cause and effect. It makes it harder.
And one thing I kind of put in my own mind, I got to thinking, like, if you have two sports teams, people watching them on TV, and one team is vastly they're getting their butt kicked. And if the refs started, kind of changing things around to make it easier for them, people would lose their minds. And so I figured, I should be the same kind of referee when I'm doing a role-playing game. Just keep it fair and objective.
Yeah, there are times when you don't want the dice to dictate because when it's just lame. So if you roll a random encounter, has nothing to do with forwarding the story, and it's going to completely unbalance things, you may either ignore the random encounter, change, how intense it is. It's kind of dumb to kill off a group on a random encounter that has nothing to do with forwarding the story. So you might, instead of having to be killed, just have them be knocked unconscious or something like that. That's where a little bit of fudging is appropriate for the greater good of the overall story and for everybody's enjoyment. If it becomes too random, right? The universe is so random and dangerous that they don't feel that they have any internal locus of control. You can end up creating a state known as learned helplessness. You can create learned helplessness in your players if it's too random. So there has to be a good balance between the two. Just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, one of the things I've been trying to do is that if they can role play it first, I'd rather they role play it rather than roll the dice.
Yes.
Because it makes it more real for them, I feel.
Sure.
And so, I only roll the dice if I have to, is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, good. Anything else on ethos, logos, or pathos, Shane?
No, I think basically my experiences have kind of covered all those just in my little microcosm of this group that I've got.
Okay. Aislinn, comments on all three of those?
No, I don't have anything. I've learned these terms before, so it was pretty much just a refresher.
Good. Dina.
So I know you guys have been talking about that the group is the players, but does the DM ever kind of count as the group? Because
yes.
Yeah, because when I was watching Gamers like a few years ago, I remember the DM was kind of like causing a lot of their problems too.
Yes. When we say the group, we mean all players at the table. DM is a player as well. And just having connectivity issues there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All players at the table, everybody participating in playing the game. So not observers, not maybe if you have an audience or something, it wouldn't be those people, but everybody at the table playing the game. That's what we're talking about. Because definitely the DM totally sets the ethos, logos, and pathos of the game. Definitely, or can he can let the players run him over like he did allow too much of in the movie. So yeah, definitely key part of it. And really, you could look at from business terms. Because there's assumed to be a little bit of a leadership role. There's kind of two leaders in a tabletop role-playing game. You have the dungeon master, right, who's kind of leading the group into playing this game, and then you have whoever ends up being the leader in the party, right, separate from the DM. So you kind of have two roles there. And if you will, in business terms, the DM is in a way like the project manager, in a way, and then everybody else is the team doing the work from there. Who will generally still have some sort of team lead in the group separate from the project manager. Although sometimes it can be the same. All right. So, Shane, you've been through Abaddon interaction patterns discussion, yes or no?
Again, I think we covered it briefly. I don't think we dove too deep into it, though.
Okay.
At least when I've been around.
Yeah, so this is where you come into things like self and inter-self, interacting with others, doing things in parallel with the others without interacting with them, playing, one against all, things like that, teams against each other, and then working cooperatively as a group. And Abaddon interaction patterns covers these 8 different interaction patterns related to activities. A subset of those are applicable to what we talk about here with the small group communication. So self or intrapersonal communication is communication with oneself where one is both the sender and the receiver. And this is where activities like meditation and stuff like that, so ruminating and thinking, all of those are internal mechanisms. Sure, you bet. Interpersonal communication is communication in the two-person, usually face-to-face setting, and like parent-child, best friend, spouses, colleagues, superior, subordinate, and so on. But there's just one-on-one conversation. That's interpersonal. Then we get into small group communication, which can happen in a number of different Abaddon interaction patterns. But in this context, small group communication is communicating among 3 to 9 individuals. Some very dramatic things can happen when interactions increase from 2, which isn't considered a group. Remember, it has to be 3 for a group. First, coalitions can form. 2 individuals can form a coalition against the third. This is the 2 against 1 phenomenon. At least 3 people are needed for this phenomenon to occur. Kind of hard to do when there's only 2. With just 2 individuals, no coalitions can form. Coalitions, even in the 3-person group, can and do change. So A and B versus C, then later it's A and C versus B, and those dynamics change a lot. This tendency to form coalitions is a key dynamic characteristic of small groups. Secondly, there's a basic change in communication behavior when it's one-on-one to a group. So when person A is talking to person B in the presence of person C, it's no longer interpersonal communication, because now there's somebody else there. And so people tend to modify what they say and how they say it differently. When it's just you and I talking and we're privately discussing something, the dynamics tend to be a little different than if there's a third person there. Happens, you see it a lot. With the addition of each new member, participation opportunities. So a small group is a group small enough that every member has the opportunity to participate. When you add more members, participation opportunities can tend to decrease, and that's kind of why they set the upper limit to 9. When you get over 9, you actually tend to be breaking the group into smaller groups. So that's why they picked that number. And we certainly see with gaming, the sweet spot's around 4 or 5 players plus the DM.
Yeah.
And but Gygax and company, they regularly ran groups. Like they originally were running groups of 30 plus players at a table, and they got it down to 12 to 20 players being their regular group size. This is a very different dynamic and style because they came from the wargaming miniatures background, and so that worked fairly well for them. It was a more rigorous approach. As ROLE playing became stronger emphasis in the activity, that became more challenging because you start adding so many people, it takes forever to get around to your turn. So it's important to keep in mind. Now, just so you're aware, there's other forms of communication like public communication, where there's one speaker and a group of listeners. And generally, the listeners are just listening. They don't interact. And then even less real-time interaction is with mass communication, where, mass emails and huge broadcasts, etc. So the group versus the individual. Two heads are better than one, and too many cooks spoil the broth. Wait a minute. Isn't that contradictory? So a lot of research done over the decades, more than 50 years of documented research showing this is why groups are important as opposed to individuals, although there are exceptions. And this is important for your players to know because you often have a player who wants to be an individual rather than part of the group. And there are moments that individual has the advantage. But over 90% of the time, the group has the advantage. So the study that was done, it was published in 2000 from Lumsden & Lumsden, with more than 50 years of documentation, showed that groups outperformed any single best individual 97% of the time. That's huge. So this is related to, in groups, first, there's a pooling of information, particularly true of teams where members are selected on the basis of their having the different but complementary skills we talked about. These are important factors. Second, when they're solving a problem, an individual tends to go down a blind alley, get rabbit holed, analysis paralysis, and not know it, right? Not get called on it until it's too late. Whereas a group member is more likely to say, hey, wait, you're going way off course here. This isn't even relevant. Or, hey, you're getting stuck. Let's keep the group going along. You've got some other feedback to help you out of that. You're sitting there browsing the web, searching one topic. The next thing you know, you're off 3 topics away from what you started on. Somebody's like, so you got that piece I was waiting for you from? And having that interaction can help. Third, groups can stimulate so that one can energize another, and they can start getting on a roll, right? You create this feedback loop with each other where you get rolling. It can be exciting and creative times. Now, all of these are two-edged weapons, of course. You can always cite examples where they go horribly wrong, but we're focusing on where it can go right in this. So let's see, I've got a note about, okay, but groups are not always superior. So groups can become dysfunctional and non-productive. We've all seen that, I'm sure, by this point. Yeah. And the dysfunctionality can be a result of the interpersonal animosities, lack of organizational support for the group and its mission, dominance of a single member, like you were talking about, and members' animosity toward the group because they have to serve on it, for example. They don't want to be in this particular group for some reason, although we get less of that. We do see it. We have parents who drag their kid to come play at the game, and we would rather they not do that. Like, you know what? It's challenge by choice. If they want to be here, great. If they want to sit and watch, let them watch. Please don't force your kid to play this game. They will sabotage the game.
An adventure where these big ditches and pine trees.
Which we're citing a specific example at a convention that happened, yeah. However, when the decision, so the individual has been found to be superior to the group when the decision must be made immediately, right? Not time for discussion. You have to decide now. Or when the task is either very, very simple or very, very complex. So in emergency situations like disasters, surgeries on the battlefield, for example, decisions must be made quickly. There's no time for a meeting and consensus and debating it. Simple tasks like making photocopies generally don't require meetings, like just make the copies. Complex tasks are often assigned to an individual because that individual is the only one competent enough to deal with real tasks. So somebody who really has a deep body of knowledge for a very specific area that nobody else has, it's better off just having that knowledgeable individual really work on it in depth. So those are some important considerations. Comments and questions on that so far?
Yeah, I have a question.
Please.
So I actually really often I work with other teenagers, so our groups end up being really large and breaking up into separate groups and going off separate ways. Do you have any way, like any idea how to bring them back together? We've been having that problem for the past couple of weeks, actually.
Sure. Define to me what you mean by large and such.
Oh, we have like 25 students per
Okay.
group.
Okay. And this is for gaming.
Yeah.
And
We're just D&D.
yeah, and you're trying to get them all to adventure together?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all trying to get them into one area, but they won't stop breaking off into separate groups.
Okay, so I have run successfully up to 20 people for an ongoing segment of a campaign. 20 to 24 is the upper limit I've successfully run that many people.
Yeah.
And so what I had to do is I get these little inexpensive egg timers.
Yeah.
And that, you know, we use the whole talking stick method where nobody's supposed to be talking except whoever holds the talking stick.
Oh.
Okay, so you stop all the side conversations and everything else. And this is great for any unruly group, period. You can do this with a small group if you use the talking stick. This is a standard recreation facilitator technique. The talking stick goes way back, right? Often people come up with stories of it's the Native American talking stick or whatever, and they literally have a stick with feathers and things like that on it.
That's a good idea, yeah.
So I like to use these little, egg timers that you can get on Amazon. Now, most of them are not very accurate, but you get the shortest one you can find, and you know they take like 15 seconds or something. And when you hand it to them, you flip it, and they've got 15 seconds to make their decision. And then the next one, because here you just have to do the math. So with 20 players, I basically was only giving people 10 to 15 seconds each, and that still meant if you do the math by the time around 20 people, it was many minutes before the next person had a turn again.
Yeah.
So when you have that many people, boredom's going to set in if it takes too long. So you got to shorten down how much time. And it also means everybody needs to pay better attention, because the other thing I do, if somebody's not paying attention, I don't say to them, hey, you need to pay attention because you're going to miss it out and you're slowing down the game. I say, so I go to them like, okay, so what do you do? And it's a known situation. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, I lost track. What was happening? Oh, apparently your character got overwhelmed and lost track of what was happening. So he hesitates for that round. Next. Usually the next time I come around, they might be a little upset, but they're actually less upset doing that than if I say, hey, why don't you pay attention, not slow the game down, right? Calling them out that way tends to be less embarrassing than their character missing a turn, right? It's just, it is a form of using bleed in what I find an effective way, because usually when you come back around, they're more likely to be paying attention. But one of the rules you want to say is everybody pay attention, because we have to do this very quickly, and you need to already have formulated exactly your plan of action in response to what has already happened. If you're not paying attention, we don't have time to reiterate everything that just happened. That slows the game down too much. You will miss your turn. Now people start paying a lot more attention to what's going on, and since they're ready and they're planning and they've make sure they look up all their spells, they have time before it comes around to their turn to get all these things ready in this larger group.
Yeah.
And then that can keep the action flowing faster. You're much more likely to keep everybody there in the group. So, for example, the example I like to use is, because this was the largest I ever did it for an ongoing period, was I was running, this is back in the 80s. I started as a paid game master in 83. And I was running 2 groups on Saturdays and 1 on Sunday. And I was a kid. I was 13, 14, 15 years old. And all of my players, the youngest player was 17. The rest were all in college or older, all the way up to their 50s. And so I had 2 on Sunday, 1 on Saturday, 2 on Saturday, 1 on Sunday. And they were all playing in Greyhawk, which was also feeding later into my Worlds of Beirut campaign. But at this point, they were in Greyhawk. And it was all Advanced Dragons First Edition. And they were in very different parts of Earth. And every now and then they would hear about some party who vanquished some evil overlord, or and they would hear it, and they thought those were just plot hooks I was throwing out there, etc. They didn't know that I was reporting on the other groups in the same campaign setting. They were literally hearing about each other, not knowing about each other. And at one point, they, by themselves, I did not intend for this to happen, but because I do leave a fairly free sandboxy options once people get going. They all picked the same core quest option and all started to come to the same location. I was like, oh crap.
That's cool.
What am I going to do?
Oh, no.
If they all get there around the same, it was looking like they're all going to get there. And like, even if they don't get there, like if one group gets there and gets the artifact that's necessary, now the other two groups are going to be chasing after them. What am I going to do about this? Well, they all ended up showing up around the same time, game time.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh, geez. Oh, what am I going to do? So I racked my brain for days. This is back before people were using email very much. So I had to phone call everybody and say, can you make it Saturday instead of Sunday for the Sunday group? And then at this time. So I kind of split the time difference on Saturday between the groups and said, for next few weeks, I need to change my schedule. But I did that to all three groups to have them all show up. And I didn't tell them that the other two groups are going to be there. And then I set up my tables in a very long table. And everybody started to show up and they didn't recognize each other, right? These players had never met each other before. And I was like, just have a seat. I had the character sheets all arrayed, in sections so that they were each in there as their group. I said, just find your character sheet, have a seat, don't say anything. Find your character sheet, have a seat, don't say anything. So more people coming in, and pretty soon there were more than 20 people there. And they're like, okay, what's going on here? So I then described who was the group that did get there slightly before the other two groups who was on watch. Says, you see coming over the rise, somebody approaching. And then I turned to that player and said, hey, and then we role played through the whole encounter, which was a challenge. And it became clear, obviously, these were all player characters, but they were not sure if they're supposed to take each other out or not, right? They're like, why do we have three groups at the same table? What is this a PvP thing? What are we supposed to do here? Because I'm not telling them why this was. So they worked it out. It was very tense. That first session was mostly everybody had their weapons drawn, everybody had their spells ready to go, and it was very tense. And, in Gamers 1, they have the thing where a character dies, they bring a new character, like, you look trustworthy, come join our party. And he comes right back into the same marching order as his previous character and all that, right? And I wanted to avoid any of that. Like, no, you don't know who these guys are. You've had people come up to you before offering help, and they backstabbed your group. Be careful. So I let the tension be there. But they all worked it out. They found out none of them were evil, and they were all there for, the same artifact for different reasons. So then the next session, after they now were no longer ready to fight each other, we're like, okay, how are we going to divvy this up? And the first thing everybody decided, like, well, how about we get the artifact first? Then we can worry about who's going to do what with it. But let's just agree that none of us will take off with it until we figured that out. And we're like, okay, so they all pooled their resources. So then we had several sessions where they all worked together. And what they did do is they worked in their units, if you will, of their group. So you had kind of the forward group, the middle group, and the rear group to keep an eye out for things. And then it was multiplanar, and they were flying and all this other stuff. So they still worked in their individual teams, if you will, but as a greater whole, working collaboratively together. But all of them, I did this turn taking with the egg timer, and they got really good at it. By the second, and third sessions, everybody was ready and prepared and responding, and we got the wait time down to, I think, maybe 5 minutes, between, which isn't too bad for normal tabletop time rotation, especially for that.
Yeah, that is pretty good.
Yeah. And that way it kept them engaged and interested. And because it was going so quickly, they really needed to pay attention, right? They had to listen to 19 other people and what they did and try to track it in their brain. Many of them had to just keep detailed notes and drawings because, we had miniatures and such, but there was a lot going on. And it just made them pay more attention that way. And again, nobody talking, no side conversations. If you say, well, such and such and such and such, I want to go off and have a side conversation, that's fine. You can declare that, doing the game and such. But everybody doing the side chatter had to just stop because it's just too chaotic. So you have to put more rules and structure than you normally would on a smaller group to make it work with a larger group. And you do have to limit how much time they get. You can't let them just go on and on and on like I am right now. you really have to limit it to, like, you got 15 seconds, say what you got to say, and move on to the next person. It made it a little bit more real time in a way for some people. So does that help you?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. I hope some of those ideas help out. There's many others, but those would be the first few things I would try that are pretty easy, kind of low-hanging fruit for working with size.
Yeah, that should work. The main goal is to keep the teenagers quiet in between their turns, and
not make the turns between their turns too long, so that they get too bored. You got to balance the
exactly.
two. Yeah.
So that they feel that they need to talk. Yeah.
Yep. Dan?
I'm also thinking, because you've got 5 weapons, if you're playing sometimes some adventures are smaller groups, some tasks. So when you have that many people, kind of like code copying, you need 25 people. That's the certain altered quests objectives to kind of really support the fact that it's a group.
Yeah, possibly. In this case, it behooved them to all work together. They needed it. They still lost. Every group lost multiple members from their party in the end. It was a massive battle, and it was awesome. it took an entire session just to resolve the big finale battle, and they lost, I think, 6 or 7 people, and they loved every minute. And it was full 3-dimensional. We had people flying on Pegasi, and so it was air combat and ground and multiplanar, and because everybody was mid-teens level by this point, so there was a lot going on. They had a blast. Yeah, so it can be done, but it definitely takes a lot more typical facilitation techniques to be implemented. Structure that. Shane, comments on what we've been talking about so far related to these small group communication, etc. So far.
First, though, I have a question, just sort of a point of order. You mentioned bleed before. I just wanted to make sure that our new people understood what we were talking about with that.
Thank you for doing that, Shane. Aislinn, are you already familiar? I think you're already familiar with the bleed concepts, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let me review them. Dina, do you have any familiarity with the concepts of bleed in context of role-playing games?
I do not.
Okay, good. So now Sarah Lynn Bowman is one of the best resources for summarizing this. She's not the creator or the only one, but she really summarizes it beautifully with both her videos and her books and such. And but bleed is the interaction of what happens between the imaginary space and your real world space, between your character, what happens to your character impacting you emotionally, or what happens in your life impacting how your character behaves. So let's say, and so there's bleed in and bleed out, and there's good bleed and bad bleed, and that's subjective. And you can use negative and positive bleed and good and bad bleed in different ways. So for example, you've had a really crappy day, you're really looking forward to the game, after a really lousy week at work, you're looking forward to the game, but you're in a bad mood because of the week. And your character, who normally plays a happy-go-lucky Kender or something, or, one of those, very friendly, happy, always is just grouchy in the game. And everybody else is looking at you, at your character like, what's wrong with it? That's totally out of character. So you've let negative bleed into your character, into the game. You bled real life into pretend life. So that's one way. And there's many different dynamics to this. I'm just going to give you some. We have a couple of blog postings that some of our researchers have been summarizing, so you can always check those out on our website, as well as some videos on this. And again, it's part of your basic training. We go into a lot more depth at it. Then there's bleed out, where you're doing the game and TPK. All your characters are killed. This is a very common form of negative bleed out, where now you're in a bad mood. Your whole group got wiped out, and you're grouchy all week, right? Because your group's wiped out. You got to make a new character if you even want to play anymore, right? I'm done. I don't want to play anymore. Whatever. I would take my crayons and go home. So
Of course, you want to break my crown.
right, yeah. And so it can ruin somebody's mood, right? They're like, yes, it's just a game, and now their mood is ruined, and they may hold on to it all week. And so that's where it's bleeding into the game out. Now, these are extremes. There's a whole bunch of subtle variants on it, and there's many others. I'm just giving you the basic fundamentals. But that's the basic concept of bleed. And it can be used for good, because you can take concepts and experiences that you learn in the game and then apply those in your own real life and get growth and development in the safe environment and apply it in your real life. So bleed is not always a bad thing, but you want to control bleed. You don't want to stop bleed, but you want to have very controlled bleed. And with a lot of our programs, we do a lot of controlled bleeding, if you will. Does that help clarify there, Dina?
Yeah.
Great. Anybody want to add to what I just said?
Me?
Anybody?
Well, I was just going to say that one of the big things on a subtler level is that sometimes a player feels like another player did something to mess up their experience, whatever. Then outwards they start getting animosity, and then it starts going back and forth. And so,
good point. Yeah. So
especially as a dungeon master, you really need to be careful that you're not putting the players in situations that they're going to take it personally.
Right. So thank you, Shane, because that's one of the many variants of bleed. So one of the areas we try to control for heavily by encouraging all players to try to have a different voice for their character. They don't need to be voice actors. They just need to be clearly speaking in and out of character. This greatly reduces the amount of hurt feelings when one character speaks to another in some way that is totally appropriate for the characters to do, but you don't want the person to think is a personal attack. So we do two things. We do voicing and change the pronouns. So instead of saying you, we say your character, or we use your character's formal name. We keep referencing the character, not the individual. I was just pointing this out to just this week to some of our GMs and such, where they kept saying, the orc attacks you, the orc attacks you. I'm like, no, the orc attacks your character. We don't have any orcs in this classroom. We don't kill our players. We only kill our characters.
Depends on how bad the game is.
Well, no. We don't kill our players, period, full stop, end of story. And I had to keep saying this at PAX Unplugged, because the other therapeutic game masters there kept saying, well, when we kill off our players, and I said, you mean characters, right? And they're like, yes, we mean characters. I had to say it 3 times during
allegedly
on the panel. I had to keep interjecting that. It got a laugh. The language is important, though. We react differently to different language. So if I'm in character, well, I'll give you an example of where it's a little bit different with DM versus player to player, but it's important to take into account. I had a player, she was doing a good job, fairly new to role-playing gaming, and I was playing this jerk of some soldier, and he's like, you're all you, blah, 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 and, right, and he's talking to the characters, and he's like, you half troll, and you half elf, your characters you're such losers, blah, 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 and I'm doing it in character, and door went over here, and blah, 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 just chewing them out because they screwed up something. And she's like, why do you have to be so mean? And I was like, oh, I'm just playing the character. It's okay. And she's like, oh, I was just in that so much. It was so real. It's just like, you were really, I'm like, okay. So it's really important that you're assessing how your interaction is happening. You may have to rein it in, if they're getting overwhelmed by it. But voicing and pronouns and, using the character names and such really can help reduce that, especially player to player. So it may be appropriate that your character is taken over by a demon or something that is then, making the other character, trying to steal his loot or something. And you want to make it not a personal attack on the person. You're just trying to stay in character. Now, this is an ongoing history. You keep doing this with your character. That's a different story. That's a whole other story. Does that make sense as far as that kind of dynamic?
Yeah.
Okay. Comments on that?
Put back to tangent on the speed.
It's relevant to this thing.
I understand.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to get back to the benefits of individual versus
Group.
all groups.
Yep.
Curious to couple of articles where, for example, they have someone developed a program where they kind of gamified protein sequencing.
Mm-hmm.
They put it out to the general public for the public specialty in protein sequencing.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the sheer volume of
I remember this was going on. Yeah.
the community was able to come up with some proteins experts hadn't been able to figure out in more than just the
Yeah, so distributed problem solving, like it goes all the way back to distributed.net in the 90s, which I was a part of that because I putting it on thousands of computers to help with the genomic project, to help with the SETA, search for extraterrestrial SETI intelligence, the cancer project, the genome project, all of these using these distributed applications. What was interesting about that is the gamification part of the distributed application, where the bits and pieces of chunks weren't just crunched automatically in the background. You had to try to figure out individual small puzzles to do that. So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting use of that technology. Okay. Moving along here, unless anybody wants to further elaborate on what we just covered.
Well, I did just have one question for Dina. Are you the one doing the big group with 25 teenagers?
No.
That was Aislinn.
Oh, okay.
Nope,
Oh,
that's
Aislinn.
me.
Okay, so I'm just kind of curious. Yeah, is it lack of available DMs that you have to have that large of a group? Because I'm kind of coming from. I've also coached youth sports and stuff like this, and even dealing with, 12 little kids all playing in the same team, it's hard to corral that. And I'm just wondering why you guys are using such a big number. And like I said, I was just wondering if it's, lack of people or why it is that you guys are trying to keep that big group together.
Well, there's only two of us that actually know how to DM is the problem. And sometimes we'll switch off because both of us know the game really well. But we choose to keep the big group together because it's our entire school class and we're both in high school. So it's kind of hard to break up the group because everybody's friends.
Well, if I could just make a suggestion, because one of the things I did when I started playing,
Shane.
Yes,
Let's
I'm sorry,
stay
go
on
ahead.
topic on this, okay?
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's unsolicited at this point, so.
Yeah, no problem. I'm
All
sorry.
right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move on here. In another important aspect, let's see, is the relationship of just human development, which can have some application to these considerations because it changes our dynamics of how we communicate. The role we have in communicate with others and how we communicate with others changes as we go through our developmental stages. There are many different models of human development. This particular example, we're talking Erikson's proposal from birth to death, the 8 different stages of Erikson's model. Many of you may be familiar with this already. So, but this is in relationship to who are the significant ones that you're communicating with and the types of groups you're interacting with at these different developmental stages. So birth through first year, the mother is the significant person. Now, again, there can be differences in this, but that's just generalization. Number 2, through the second year, the father becomes a significant person. Again, these are Erikson's theories, and they have some strengths and weaknesses and have been challenged in different areas. Third year through 5th year, the family is the significant group. Number 4, the 6th year till the onset of puberty, the neighbor and school provide significant other groups. Number 5, adolescence, peer groups become significant, what she was just talking about there. Number 6, early adulthood, friends, intimates, and workmates are the significant others. Number 7, middle adulthood, the shared household provides the significant other core. And number 8, late adulthood, family is important, but people often see humanity as being significant as they like to come to the conclusion that their lives have made a difference, so they tend to engage in all these activities. So again, these are oversimplifications. They're just interesting ways to look at them. Now, but bringing back to some of the paradoxes that were mentioned early, like, we talked about the two heads versus one, but now we get into real paradoxes where there's at least two paradoxes to keep in mind. The first paradox, according to Bales, is, I'm going to read the whole section here from 1950. When attention is given to the task, strains are created in the social and emotional relations of the members of the group, and attention then turns to the solution of these problems. So long as the group devotes its activity simply to social emotional activity, however, the task is not getting done, and attention would be expected to turn again to the task areas. Do you guys need me to break that down for you? Clear for you?
I'm good.
Basically, the summation is,
Yeah, I'm good too.
you know, people will prioritize, actually prioritize.
Yeah, if you're focusing on the problems of your group versus instead of the task at hand, you're focusing on the group, on the problems of the group. You're not getting done what you need to get done. And then when you're focusing on all the work to get done, then oftentimes you can be letting a lot of the problems of the group build over time. So number two relates to individual freedom. We have a need for group affiliation that's pretty hardwired in most human beings. In the group, social needs are satisfied, most notably for the need for maintenance of self-concept. At the same time, when we join a group, we lose individual freedom because we eventually adopt the values of the group and identify with the group. Often, this is the reason for the anger and hostility expressed or suppressed by group members. They want to be in the group, but they don't want to be in the group. So Goffman described this paradox when he said, to have a self, one must fill a role, but to fill a role is to lose self. So, for example, a person marries and starts a family. Once they've entered this group, the family, the person has new roles to fill. Roles defined by society, culture, religion, their immediate family, and the spouse's family. Past freedoms and persona are gone or heavily modified. And so the new roles redefine the person's self, and to violate the rules of the new roles is to invite negative consequences. Who'd like to discuss those two paradoxes? Start with Aislinn. You want to comment on any of that?
I don't really understand what you're talking about, to be honest.
For both of them, or just the second one?
For both of them.
Okay. So in the first one, we're talking about, you have a group. So let's use like a basketball team. And the basketball team, every team has interpersonal dynamics. There's some players who like other players and don't like other players, etc. You've got, everybody has their different roles. You've got, the terminology has changed since I played basketball, but you got your center and your forwards and your guards and all that. So everybody has their assigned roles on the team that they're supposed to play, depending on whether they're in offensive or defensive mode. When they're up playing against another team, they're focusing on trying to take on that team. But let's say this basketball team, nobody's getting along with each other. Your own team is not. Because of the interpersonal situation, you've got bad communication. He's always throwing the ball to the other guy, not to the person who's open, and not paying attention to your signaling. So there's a real lack of cohesion in this team. And so the team is not doing well. So now the coach, instead of spending all the time on practicing shooting and dribbling and passing and all that, is spending time trying to work out the signals between and trying to overcome the personal differences between the group, because the conflict's gotten so bad, the team can't perform anymore its original task, which is to win the game. So you're putting all your energy into these interpersonal conflicts, trying to solve the interpersonal issues. You're not focusing on getting better at playing basketball. It's an indirect import. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, it does.
So you're either working heavily on, being a better basketball player, or your interpersonal groups, and you can do a little bit of both, but it's kind of, you have to switch back and forth between them in tasks, because when you're working heavily on the interpersonal stuff, you don't have time to play the game. And when you're playing the game, you don't really have time to work on the interpersonal stuff. So that's the first one. That's that conflict between task and interpersonal conflict,
All right.
and just the function of the group. The other one is about identity, and so and this is more of an issue in Western individual societies than in Eastern social societies, to generalize, but it's because that culture tends to already be much more group centric. We tend to be more individual centric. But so from the Western perspective, we have an identity of self and what we like to do and our freedoms that we like to have. I like to sleep in late and turn the TV up loud and lays around in my robe or something like that. I'm just making stuff up here, by the way. And
Allegedly.
then you get married, and the spouse is bringing people over and needs the house picked up for company coming over, and you got kids. You can't leave little objects laying on the ground, or they're choking hazards. You got to pick those. You got to put little protective slots over all the outlets, and your whole life changes, and you stop identifying as this individual, and it's more of the part of this whole rather than just as the individual, and you kind of lose some of that your own personal identity. And if you try to fight for it, then the conflict goes way up in the group and the negative consequences. So somebody's bringing having family and having kids, and they don't want to take the responsibility of being a parent, and the role changes that come up in having that. It would have been best if they hadn't had kids in the first place, but in that case, if they're not willing to adjust to that. But you can see that creates all that conflict to push against the expectations of your society and your individual family group of the roles you're supposed to assume, leading to that conflict. So identity of self and the behaviors of self versus the identity of the group, where you now become, the parental unit as opposed to just your self unit. Does that help clarify in the second one a little bit? So taking out the family thing, you can use the sports analogy of the basketball player who always likes to hog the ball because they're the number one. They're really good at 3-pointers. And so they're always hogging the ball for the 3-pointers, and they're not passing the ball to the other group. And really, they're supposed to be the forward, not supposed to be sitting out there. I forget which guard. They're supposed to be in closer to the net to help support and be ready there to feed it, and they're not playing their role for the team's sake. And so it's completely disruptive. And so the team's like, hey, come on, man, play your role. That's not your role. Quit doing that. And the more you push back and say, no, this is what I do, this is my identity, rather than being, oh yeah, we're team, Ozarks or whatever, right? But once you accept that and you become part of the team and you start to feel part of the team and you are a Team Ozark member, then you have a different role identity. And then there's a different dynamic that happens when you're doing that versus when you're not doing it. Is that clearer?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Anybody else do you want to comment, Aislinn, on any experiences you've had observing that in gaming?
I can't really think of any off the top of my head.
Okay. Let it percolate.
Sorry.
It's
Yeah.
okay. No, it's okay. It's putting you on the spot for something new, but just in case something did occur to you. Dina, what do you think of this so far?
I get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any anecdotes or anything you'd like to share in thinking about that?
Not really. I'm still trying to take all this in, all this new terminology in still.
Yeah, we're a fire hose of info, but luckily, as I said, we set up the training when you get your accounts and everything. It's self-paced, so you can go back and reiterate as much as you want, so it'll sink in. And then later, we've got an online learning platform that lets you go back and review and take quizzes and stuff too. That makes it easier. Over time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, but yeah, it is fire hoses, but don't stress about it. Just take in what you can. Your brain will be filled with all kinds of stuff, and you'll only retain a fraction of it. But it's an iterative thing because it'll get covered again. Like Shane and Dan, they're getting bits and pieces of this now in different ways. So it's going to stick each time you go through it as new people come and you go through these. Okay. And they really do help inform as a player and a game master. When you start looking at games in this way, it gives you a lot more awareness, and that gives you a lot more control over the environment of the game to make a better game. A lot of these things are happening that most people are just oblivious to, and they just go, yeah, just the game suddenly turned south and it blew up, and I don't know why. It might have been because of this, and they missed all the other cues that were there for multiple sessions or hours leading up to it, that if they'd had this kind of training, they would be able to head it off at the pass long before it blew up. Okay, so those are the two paradoxes. So again, to summarize them, task versus focusing on keeping the group working. You're either focusing on your task or you're focusing on trying to make the group work, and they tend to one or the other. And then the other one is identity, between individual identity versus group identity. That there's a tension between the two of those. All right, we'll do a quick little simple quiz here. And I'm going to start with the most senior ones first, and but try to give them the hardest ones, and then I'll go the easier questions to the new folks. Let's start with Dan. In categorizing human communication along the number of dimensions, we learned that coalitions first form at the what stage? That one's too easy. When do coalitions first form at what stage? So your choices are self-communication, interpersonal, small group, public communication, or mass communication. Yeah, that's correct. Because when do coalitions first form at what number of people?
3 people.
Yes. Okay. So that,
yeah.
yeah, but that was obvious to you now.
Yeah.
Would it have been an hour ago?
Or yeah.
Okay, you would have remembered that specifically about
because,
the
coalitions.
coalition. Okay. All right. Yes.
I can't guess technically.
Yeah. All right. Shane.
Yes.
During adolescence, the most significant person or group involved in the development of self-concept is the...
Adolescence, I would say, is a family group.
So it's mother, father, family, peer, or school.
So I would say family, unless
Okay.
I'm putting
Aislinn.
adolescence in the
Aislinn,
wrong.
what would you say?
School?
Okay. Dina, what would you say?
I would say peers.
Okay. And Dan, what would you say?
Peer group.
Yeah. Correct answer is peer group. At adolescent stage of development, the most significant person or group involved in the development of self-concept is the peer group, according to Erickson's theories and what we discussed here. So
Wait, what age is considered adolescence?
that's from about...
Yeah, I was just going to ask that too.
Yeah, that's typically about puberty to late teens.
Oh, I was thinking it was earlier than that. Okay.
No. So let me
Me
run
too.
let me run this by you again. These are pretty standard as far as age divisions in most areas. So we got birth through first year, it's the mother. For the second year, the father. Third through fifth year is family. Sixth till the onset of puberty is neighbor and school. Adolescence, which is again right around puberty up until late teens or so, that becomes peer groups. Early adulthood, which is typically late teens or early 20s, it's friends, intimates, and workmates. Middle adulthood, shared household provides a significant other, so that's kind of like late 20s, 30s onward until late adulthood. Generally, the way they break up the groups, and there is some variance on this a little bit, but it's in the ballpark. So you have infants, which are basically, in the early baby stages. Then you have young children, so that's typically the 2 to 5, 6-year-old range. Then childhood, which is typically the 5 or 6 to 10, 11-year-old range. Then adolescent, which is around that 10, 11, 12 to 17, 18, 19 range. Then young adult, which is that late teens to early to mid 20s range. And then adulthood, which is the mid to late 20s on up. So that's just general terminology in most of the social sciences and such, if that helps you to make that distinction. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, good. Okay, so Dina, a small group contains how many members?
3 to 9.
Correct. Is correct. And Aislinn, a team is composed of individuals who have what kind of skills?
Complementary skills.
Correct. Complementary. Got it. All right. Not real tough. These are easy questions, but still get you thinking along those modes. All right. So let's see how much do we want to go into group categories this time around. Skip it. Therapeutic and non-therapeutic, adolescent groups, work groups, self-help groups, growth groups. And I think I'm going to skip this section for next iteration through. We can go deep. All these other types of groups. We got teams. Okay, let's talk about teams and the advantages of teams and resistance to teams. Because this comes into the players that you have come in who don't want to be team players, right? They don't want to work with the group. They kind of want to do their own thing, which can be really disruptive to a role-playing game session, right? And a little bit of what you're experiencing, Aislinn, where everybody kind of wants to go off and do their own thing rather than working together, right?
Right.
So, again, we've got the definition of a team, people who have complementary skills that must be committed to a common purpose. So that's one thing I wanted to ask with what's going on there. I'm assuming you have everybody committed to a common purpose. There's some overarching goal that everybody's supposed to be working towards, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then the question is, are there complementary skills or do we have a lot of redundant stuff going on? And so where there's redundancy, you need to find ways to make the redundancy more distinctive, find some other characteristic that lets them stand out in a more unique way that becomes important, that they fulfill their role in some distinctive way. And then really important is accountability. Are they accountable for their actions? Are there consequences for not following through with their commitments? That needs to be very clear. If there's not a clear consequence, people all the time will just go off and do their own thing. There has to be a clear understanding of the consequences. Those consequences have to apply to them in some way. You know, when you get older, it's easier to be more abstract about consequences. But when you're younger, it has to be like, well, what's in it for me? Well, why does it matter to me? And so finding ways to make them accountable for their actions can be really helpful in herding all those cats. So advantages of teams. Since, again, this is talking business and such, so often they're newly formed to solve a problem. Those teams, when they come together and they're new, so let's say you have a new gaming group you put together. Usually, unless they all know each other from other cliques, they're not burdened by the baggage of history. So since they're newly formed, there's little chance that there will be lingering and smoldering animosities as there might be in a long-standing group. No member of the team is waiting to get even with someone else. Now, again, that's assuming that's the case. I have given multiple examples here when I moved to Spokane, and I put together 120 different players, in nearly 20 different groups to do that 10 to 20 study. And I had two players at the same table going at each other, and I didn't know why. And I was able to turn it around, and they ended up becoming a highly effective duo. Even they'd hated each. These guys were in their 40s. They'd hated each other since high school. They'd come to physical blows back in. And I didn't know any of this, right? So sometimes that will happen. You will get people coming into your group that have some history in some other ways, and that can be a problem. But it is hoped that everybody is new. It's a clean slate. Nobody has any prior history. On the other side of the coin, members of a long-standing group might become bonded by positive emotional experiences. So this is the positive side of an ongoing group, to such an extent that, and this is a consequence as well, that they can no longer criticize each other's ideas and as a result become ineffective. So they won't speak up when somebody makes a bad idea, wants to go down a bad path, because they've got a relationship now that they don't want to hurt. And that hurts the team, right? If you've got a player who keeps making the same mistake over and over and would be better in another role, but nobody wants to hurt that person's feelings, your entire team suffers because of that. Teams are generally nimble and flexible compared to larger groups. They can respond to the present problem efficaciously and without hesitation, right? You don't have to go get 50 people and get all their consent and everything to try to make a decision. Oh, let's do a vote of 50 people. Blah, blah, blah. You can quickly, especially if you've gotten to the forming and norming and performing phase, work very quickly together as a small group. This is why startups do very well at first and then struggle. Because teams are more nimble and respond faster, they can help an organization survive in a very competitive world. They can give them specific tasks to be assigned to deal with. Teams thrive in an information society where information is widely available and delivered instantaneously. So this is talking about more of the online tools and ways of communicating with each other. A little less applicable to the tabletop game unless you're using tools and such. Okay, this talks about more about tech. We're going to worry about that. Teams can provide a socio-emotional reward, which comes from the satisfaction of targeting a goal and achieving it all in the context of a group of newly met strangers. So again, you start to now have a feeling of bonding, and you got to share that experience, right? You go and tackle a mountain by yourself. That's a wonderful reward unto itself. But it's even more amazing when you had other people you get to share that with, and you can talk about it decades later about the experiences that you guys shared together going through all those challenges and overcoming. And only everybody in that group really appreciates and understands just how hard it was to take out that boss. Right? Just that particular experience, you've now got that bonding. Teams have fun. That's the line. Teams have fun. Since teams are focused on a specific problem, success or failure is easy to assess because you're going to smaller pieces as opposed to big organization. So the kingdom, right, has all these problems and challenges going on, but this team is sent to just go solve this small specific problem, not all the problems of the kingdom until maybe later, higher level and such, but to just solve the raids at this small village, and it's easy to measure your success or failure with that particular group. So, no, of course, it happens. Resistance to teams, lack of conviction, and personal styles, and weak organizational performance. So lack of conviction and personal styles. Some people believe that teams do not perform better than individuals. Now, we already talked about that, right? 97% of the time they do. But these individuals, especially if team members do not have complementary skills, but instead are selected because of cronyism, for example, the team will experience unsatisfactory. They'll have an unsatisfactory. So the skills are really critical in that context, especially just because it's that's what you hear people complain about a lot. The significant other of whoever them is there, not a very good player or disruptive or gets away with whatever. That's not going to be fun. Players. Teamwork represents a set of values that encourages behaviors such as listening and constructively responding to points of view expressed by others. So, constructively responding points of view expressed by others. Giving others the benefit of the doubt and providing support to those who need it. Regarding personal styles, some people do not like to work in teams. Some are just loners and don't want to work in a team because they feel it's too time-consuming, feel the burden of team participation is seen as interfering with their individual accomplishments, and even their own, sense of identity, as we talked about. Especially people who've been leaders in managerial and supervisory positions are reluctant to serve on teams where they are no longer the leaders. They don't like somebody else being them. Then there's the weak organizational side. So this is the party cohesion not working well. Things aren't worked out. So weak performance ethics, just having poor ethics in the group. Failure to communicate rationally and emotionally to their people so that the emotions are used in a positive way to engage and excite people to care about this. Why do we want to go save all these children who are going to be killed by the orcs and everything else? One person who's dispassionate might go, well, it's the surplus population. Let them die. We don't have to deal with it. But you hopefully will make an emotional thing like, these are little children. They can't defend themselves. We got to go help and save them. Right? Dad's going, rah, rah, rah,
no, I'm just thinking okay, and we found a lawful evil person.
Yeah. Sometimes performance demands and the accountability standards just aren't made clear. So people don't know what is expected of them. What is success? I see this all the time in business and in gaming. It's not clear to the players what success and failure looks like. it can be kind of vague. They've got a general sense of it, but they don't really know. And it's hopefully the players will ask for that clarity, but new players don't know to ask. And so it's important for the GM to kind of give them clearly defined parameters of what success and failure looks like to help them then make the right choices as they go through the quest. In such environments where politics displace performance as the daily focus, then the office politics play on each individual's securities, which then in turn erode the conviction, either serve or invest in the team, right? When politics become more important than doing the quest and everything else, and a lot of people get frustrated with that. All that schmoozing and brown nosing and what have you going on. Some people would find that very frustrating. So many organizations use team building exercises when a team is created, but how much you need to do that varies from group to group. So like when we play with little kids who are like 5 years old and such, we don't have to do a bunch of team building exercises. Most of them, even the kids who are coming in, really at risk, really struggle. If we get them into the story as quickly as possible, they usually come together as a team. Little kids, it's as you get older that it becomes harder to do. Very interesting. So you watch the adolescents tend to, if there's nobody there they're familiar with, tend to really struggle with the coming together as a team, and then on through adulthood and such. But little kids, they come together usually very. We don't have to spend a lot of, but for the wide range, this is part of why we use like drum circles and naming, the cooperative concept of a facilitator giving some outline directions, but then each person doing their individual thing, but in context to everybody else there. And it's done. They don't have to verbalize any of it. They just need to follow along with the actions and listen, and really is quite effective. Wide range, all the way from 2 years old to 102 years old. Any drummers or players that old. So, comments, questions on that so far between these advantages, resistance to teams, and some of the reasons why there's resistance to teams. Shane?
Well, one thing, just talking about some of the negative things that happens with groups because of different reasons. Another thing is when the group dynamic changes for whatever reason, somebody quits, whatever. And one thing that really struck out, I just remembered a bit ago, was when the Chicago Bulls, they won those first 3 championships, and then Michael Jordan took a year off to do his thing. And they did an interview with Scottie Pippen, and he was talking about how, first of all, the team didn't realize how much of a shield he was for them, because normally they go to a game, they get off the bus, they go up to the rooms. He's being mobbed by fans and had to take all this extra time. When he was gone, the whole team got mobbed. So that was a big dynamic for them. And then he was expected to kind of become the next Michael Jordan. And that wasn't his playing style, that wasn't his strength. And he said it was really frustrating and stressful for him to be forced into a role that he was never really, he felt made for.
Okay. Aislinn?
How do you like fix it if somebody leaves and the dynamic just isn't the same afterwards? How do you like get everybody back together and want to keep playing?
That is going to be covered as we go through this. That's what happens is when the team members change, you are now in a reforming phase. So everybody has to go back through forming, storming, norming again every time there's a personnel change. Whether you add a new person, subtract a person, whatever, that triggers your reforming once again. And it's more complicated with reforming as opposed to forming. Initial forming is easier in a lot of ways than reforming with some new people. Because now you've got the people who all know each other versus the new person. And that creates a whole other dynamic. So yeah, that is something we will eventually get through as we go through all this. We may not get through all of it today, but it is part of what we cover in all of this. Yeah, it is a challenge. That is part of these challenging dynamics. Let me switch here to Nicholas. Do you have a question for me? Okay, are you just working on? going through it. Okay, cool. Let me know if you need. All right. So anyway, the next section here talks about team building exercises, trust building, rocks and ropes and things, which I've done all of these. I've been on multiple executive retreats, and we've done all of these trust falls and like if you ever watch, whatever you want to say, all kinds of things to say about Trump, but his early reality show, Apprentice, the first few episodes before he got into the whole celebrity insanity were very relevant to what happens at the business of kind of what we do on retreats. You're given these challenges and you break off into teams. You got to come back with solutions, whatever the challenges were that you were given. And so role playing is a wonderful application for this and such. But others would do more different, less business related, and do other activities to try to build. Because what you want is you want to get the team to that performing phase. So every time you bring in a new team, so like when I was training as a VP and such, we were all a bunch of junior VPs, so we were called senior principals. We were all brought together into this publicly traded company, and we were all brought together. We'd never met each other before, and we're given all this data of this made-up competitor, but it's an aggregate of existing competitors, and we're supposed to come up with challenges and solutions, ways to overcome that, and then come back to the senior executives with our proposals. And then the teams that had the ideas that they already knew what worked and didn't work for these challenges, they got to go on and keep going up your promotion cycle. And the others went, well, nice try, let's go back to the drawing board, or I guess you're wiped out from the candidacy of going up. And but others, they just do these other things, trying to build that comradeship through just doing these retreats and doing the high and low ropes courses and things like that. For gaming groups, we don't really have that option. We show up at a table, the first time that you're joining a group, and we've got to figure out ways to do it. So one way you can do this in the gaming context, though, is by having little mini adventures before the big one. So you can give the group a quick encounter right there, like as they're forming in the bar or whatever. Once they've introduced each other and acknowledged they're working together and such, you have something happen in the bar all of a sudden that they've got to quickly work together to put them under pressure. Putting them under pressure is where you really get to find the performance in it. So that's a way to kind of simulate it, where it's not hugely critical, but to the rest of the story, but you put in these little pieces to help build up the group dynamics and help them come through the other side of the compressor a little more effective this time, so getting them ready for the bigger challenges that are serious. Questions about that? Comments? Thoughts? Start with Dina. Any thoughts or questions on that so far, Dina?
No.
Okay, Aislinn?
Nothing for me.
Shane?
Nope, I'm good.
What?
Oh, I just said that I'm good.
Okay, and Dan?
No questions.
Thought about this, but I actually had.
Good. Sure.
The problems with the sort of scenario being forced into get in the projects and I found with they were part of the group didn't.
Yeah, that happens all too often.
Yeah.
Happened to me many times.
That happens too often, and I work with happens.
Right. Yep. Well, again, in the business world, it's assumed it's different than school. Like school, you get assigned to people, and you get a lot of slackers, and then you get the few who really care, and the few who really care end up doing much of the work and carrying the others. In the business world, you certainly do see that, but if the business is run effectively, they usually weed that out pretty quickly. But depends on the organization. This has examples of different exemplary teams. So we have like the Thomas Edison research team, the Skunk Works team, the Apple Macintosh team, Marine Corps, Cirque du Soleil, the Discovery Space Shuttle crew, Lance Armstrong's Tour de France team, one of his before or after he got busted. And they each have different styles, right? Some are more top down, some are more egalitarian, some are more bottom up, and none of those are the single determining factor of their success. It was a lot of the other variables we're going to be talking about that really made the difference to their successes. And so it's important that everybody knows that different teams can operate in different ways and still have success. Here's some critique of teams. This is from a book by Michael Schrage called No More Teams, Mastering the Dynamics of Creative Collaboration, suggesting that the enthusiasm for teams is not universal. It starts out with, why don't teams make sense? What could possibly be wrong with more and better teamwork? In an ideal world, absolutely nothing. But we do not live in an ideal world. We live in this one. In a job interview, a friend was asked if they were a team player. Yes, they replied. Team captain. This story, which happens to be true, invariably gets a good laugh. Team captain. That's not a team player, right? That's somebody who just wants to be the boss. But it's cynical and knowing laugh. Everyone in the room understands precisely what most organizations mean by players. Quite simply, the word team has been so politicized, so ensnared at the pathology of the organization, that we really don't know what it means anymore. Is a team a medium to manage value or a mechanism to play politics? It's easy to answer, both. Of course, in that case, a team means whatever the organization wants it to mean, which, of course, that it has no meaning at all. It's, however, the popular management metaphor of the moment. But is it the right metaphor? Is it a metaphor we should be building and rebuilding our organizations around? Does this metaphor create more understanding than confusion? Answer to all these questions, unfortunately, is no. The concept of teams obscures rather than reveals the real relationship challenges our organizations face. Teams are a fiction, a verbal convenience, rather than a useful description of how people in a firm cooperate and collaborate to create value. Even worse, teams make it too easy for organizations to lie, cheat, and kid themselves about the way they work. More often than not, a team is as much a political entity as a value-creating one. The word is a little too flexible, too malleable, and too manipulatable. Are you on a team or not? Is that a question centered on creating value for customers and clients? Or is it meant to satisfy the insecurities of a manager checking on the loyalty of their people? The answers reveal an awful lot about what teamwork and team players in today's organizations and tomorrow's. No More Teams is a book that insists that organizations literally can't afford to design themselves around words that are dangerously ambiguous. The issue isn't teams, it's what kind of relationships organizations need to create and maintain if they want to deliver unique value to the customers' clients. That's what it's saying. So, believes that teams has been so misused it's become meaningless, and the focus should be on collaboration. The characteristics and behaviors of collaborators should be examined, and that certain themes of successful collaboration recur over time, and that the themes seem to be universal in nature, transcending business, arts, science, culture, and time. So he lists 13 themes. Competence, a shared understood goal, mutual respect, tolerance, and trust, creation and manipulation of shared spaces, multiple forms of representation, playing with the representations, continuous but not continual communication, formal and informal environments, clear lines, and I've got this one really highlighted, clear lines of responsibility but no restrictive boundaries. Number 10, decisions do not have to be made by consensus. 11, physical presence is not necessary. Again, that's not really applicable here. But number 12, selective use of outsiders for complementary insights and information. So in gaming terms, NPCs and such. Number 13, collaborations end. So, competence. Individual collaborators do not have to be brilliant, but they must have some threshold of competence. By the way, do not mistake confidence for competence. There's a lot of research that often shows, especially like in the school setting, the most confident of the students, with exceptions of course, tend to be the least competent students. Time and time again, research supports this. Generally, a little bit of insecurity helps keep you, questioning what the real answers are and make you think things out a little bit better. It tends to be the folks who really aren't doing well at all, they score really high on confidence, very low on competence. Always, and a lot of people mistake one saying. You can have competence and confidence. Once you do build a level of competence, you build a career and you become very good at it and adept at it, there may be some confidence associated with that, and then that's fine. But especially like in a school setting where it's all new stuff, and until you're a teacher and such, the competence isn't really there. Watch out for the ones who are so confident. Maybe you want to comment on that first one there? By the way, in Jitsi, there's a little raise your hand feature. If you lower your mouse, you'll see where you can raise or lower your hand. So if you're interested in saying, I can't always be looking at the screen to watch for it. But when I ask if anybody wants to say something, that's one way to not step over each other if you want to speak. That's a good way to do that because I'm looking at the screen then.
It's the overuse of kind of reminds.
Yeah, buzzword bingo. I literally have a book, buzzword bingo. As your manager or whoever's up there talking, you start filling in all the buzzwords, and you literally can play bingo with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody want to comment about all the negative viewpoint of teams? Okay. Number 2, a shared understood goal. This is, really important. And pretty self-explanatory. Right? You need to know what you're all working together towards, not going off in 5 different directions. Number 3, mutual respect, tolerance, and trust. And this is really important in the gaming setting, and sometimes isn't there, and can be really unfortunate for when that isn't there. Collaborators, and this is important, this does work for gaming, it really does. Collaborators don't have to be friends. They don't have to like each other. They just need to have mutual respect, tolerance, and trust. I've worked with people and I've gamed with people that outside of gaming I would never want to associate with. Just disagreed with them on everything, but they were incredibly talented and skilled at whatever the reason was they were there, whether it was the database administrator or developer or whatever, the team, this mechanic, whatever. They work a lot of different roles. Again, I wouldn't go hang out with them at all, didn't care for their personality at all, but boy, I trusted their competence when they said, oh, well, this will not work, or this will fail this percentage of the time, etc. That was the person to respect and trust, and then try to tolerate their isms that let them slide. Because same thing in a gaming group, right? We all run into players we don't like, but and some don't seem to have redeeming qualities. Sometimes we just have to get past our own initial emotional reaction to go, oh, wait a minute, okay, yeah, this person rubs me the wrong way, I disagree with them politically, loudmouthed, whatever it is, but boy, this person's a master tactician. Boy, this person sure can solve those riddles, right? And go, Harriet, handle this. Boy, that's an outdated. Oh, Harriet knows these. She's really good at riddles. Let her handle this.
What's wrong with Harriet?
I know, it's just a really old. That's not really a modern time name. I'm trying to think last time I ran into a Harriet that wasn't like 60 or 70. I don't know. Any comments on the mutual respect, tolerance, and trust, especially because that is so important in gaming? Aislinn?
What?
Uh-oh. Your character hasn't. Was it just the audio cutting out?
Did you say my name?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Oh, okay. I just wasn't sure if you said my name or
Okay.
not. No, this makes a lot of sense. I actually see this a lot in the high school, so
yeah.
it's
Oh, heck
pretty
yeah.
fresh in my mind. I have a lot of examples for these types of things.
Oh yeah. Would you care to share one that you know, anonymized, obviously?
Yeah, give me a second to get in a quiet space.
Okay.
Sorry, I was in the living room cooking a little bit of food.
Oh, good.
So, uh, I actually in my gaming group, the really large one in my class, we have like a jock who plays with us, and I don't normally associate with jocks, and I don't really like this guy specifically, but in the game he is an amazing tactician because it comes from football, right?
Mhm.
And so he can think of these things on the fly, and in the game it's amazing to play with him, but the moment we're out of the game I would definitely never ever talk to him.
Yeah. Well, you know, fantasy football is just D&D for nerds.
Exactly.
I mean, for jocks, excuse me. D&D for jocks, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No, that's exactly. And there probably a lot of others in your group feel the same way, but that's good that you can recognize
Oh, yeah.
and respect and tolerate them for the good of the group.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because our teacher also joins in the group, and it brings all of the students together, and we play on Fridays,
Mhm.
and it's an English class, so we get to learn a lot about each other, and it makes us work better in group projects and stuff. So
Good. Dina, do you want to comment on any of that?
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like, I have been in like positions where like when I'm with the coworkers, like I can associate with the coworkers, but then afterwards I don't interact with any of them, like outside of work.
Sure. Yeah, no, that happens all the time. We often compartmentalize our relationships that way. So, yep. Shane, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just a couple things, especially on this specific mutual trust and thing. Um, as I mentioned before, I played with a lot of diverse people when I was in the military, and I mean, fortunately, it was really cool because we came from different departments, and you know, we could unite with the game and also find out what other people did. But there were two specific people, two separate instances that they. It felt like they were purposely trying to undermine and annoy everybody. And in those two separate instances, we finally had to ask those people to leave because they were being so hurtful to the group dynamic. And I mean, I felt bad about it, but you know, they were hurting the group. And like
Okay,
again, like I said,
but that is a different issue than what we're talking about here currently, which is that you've got people that you personally don't get along with, but that are helpful to the group. That's a yeah.
well, yeah, and that
that's
was
a
the thing.
different issue.
These people didn't have the respect and the tolerance and the trust. They constantly broke all that.
Right.
And so unfortunately, those individuals we had to ask to leave. But most people, like you said, they're people that as people we didn't like, but once it was in the game, we had this understanding of trust to not sabotage each other.
Right. Right. Yeah. Good. All right. Number 4, creation and manipulation of shared spaces. Now, you might not immediately think of that as relevant to role-playing gaming, like because they're talking about shared office spaces and stuff like that. But it is applicable because we talk about using aids and things to help. But we talk also about aphantasia. Aislinn, I already tell you what aphantasia is.
you've mentioned it.
Okay, and Dina would be probably new to you. It's the inability to create an image from imagination, kind of in your mind's eye. So if you say to somebody, imagine, if you will, a 15-foot by 25-foot room with green walls on the left and forward side and white walls on the right and rear side, and there's a door on the far side with stairs going up and a door behind going into an outhouse, and describing all this detail. And most people can visualize that scene as you're verbally describing it to pretty good consistency. And but then there's people with aphantasia. This is a fairly recent term. It's kind of come and gone a few times, but since about 2015, it's kind of started to stick. It turns out there's whole groups and stuff. I just recently came across more of them, but I've been talking about this for several years. And so it's really important for your gamers who have aphantasia, who probably don't know they have it, but these are the people who really do struggle keeping track of tactical situations in the scene. If you don't have miniatures or a whiteboard or something to show where everybody is in relationship to everybody else, these are the people who really struggle with that. They cannot visualize without something to refer. They just can't create a whole cloth. Now, once they've seen it, like you show them a photo, snapshot, a drawing, even a quick VR image, whatever, they can now remember it, but they can't imagine it based on words. And so we like to always try to use either battle mats with tokens or miniatures or drawings, whatever, or a whiteboard to always, especially in tactical situations, or where they have to like figure out riddles and puzzles and things like that. We love theater of the mind, but we try to be inclusive and accessible by adding visual aids whenever possible without getting too carried away. They don't need to be fancy. You just need little placeholders. And that's generally enough to address the aphantasia issue. Yes, it's specific to visual, not other senses. So we also use other sensory adjectives. Yeah. So we use smell and sound and touch and flavor and all of that. So as to help them have a more immersive experience. But it's the visualization side that they really struggle. And Professor Colts out at EWU has that. He and I had long conversation about that. Part of why he had trouble understanding how role playing, because he just couldn't visualize the scenes. So, comments on the creation and manipulation of shared spaces. Anyway, what it says here, I don't need to read it. I've made my point there. So, comments on that, Dina.
I think I watched a YouTube video on this. It was like a YouTube animator who was talking about how she and like a lot of creative people have trouble with this. And I do love using whiteboards for games and visuals a lot because it helps me as well as like probably helping the other players. So I can see where people are and they can see sort of where they are.
Yep. Now, there are lots of people, the majority of people can do theater of the mind without any additional visual aids. But you never know when somebody in your group has aphantasia. Often they won't speak up. And it'll only be when you start getting into arguments about what location they were in and people get defensive that you might start to realize this person's actually struggling with keeping track. And it's not lack of interest. It's they literally cannot visualize it. So though theater of mind has its place, I do encourage all GMs try to use something to track, like you're saying, even just a whiteboard or something, pieces of paper, anything to just help keep track. It makes it more accessible for everybody. Aislinn, did you have anything you want to say?
I really like the idea of whiteboards actually because they're super easy just to like erase and replace things. I had never thought of that before. We've always just used paper.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But they're available, so I don't know why we don't use them.
In the tech industry, when I was in Silicon Valley doing the whole .com thing, I worked at places that the entire walls were spray painted with the whiteboard material, and then we were glassed in, in a soundproof, wireproof, the chicken coop wire to create a Faraday cage so nobody could snoop on our top secret conversations with Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Microsoft and Intel. All those high security things. Like we're in a glass bubble, but we could write. We were all given whiteboard markers, and we're supposed to, as we're conversing and brainstorming, just start writing on the glass and on the walls from ceiling to floor. Anywhere, all of it was meant to be written on. They just had made it all of that surface so you could just write anywhere. So it just freed you up to be able to do that, and it really helped with the diagrams, trying to explain. Well, what about the relationship of this and this? And we're doing data modeling and everything else. And if you didn't have that way to visualize it, it would just, oh my goodness, trying to describe it verbally. So yeah, very important tools. Number 5, multiple forms of representation. Collaborators working on a problem use many representational forms. For example, physicians collaborating on a case may incorporate into their decision-making a case study with vital signs, results of blood, urine and spinal fluid tests, x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, biopsies, and so on. Each source of information is a different representation of the patient. So putting this in gaming terms, use your adjectives and don't stick to just sight adjectives. Use all of them whenever you can. Try to cover all the senses. And by the way, there's a lot more senses than you might think. For example, like gustatory, like the sense of being hungry. If you check out the RPG model at rpgmodel.com, let's see, I have just a real rough listing there. And I always have to look back at it too because I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. Let's see here. In the diagram, right page, scrolling down, interaction, interface, and senses. You got auditory, visual, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, kinesthetic, proprioceptive, vestibular, spatial, exteroceptive, and interoceptive, organic, emotional, spiritual, wellness, and social. So those last few start to become arguable about whether they're senses, but there are people who propose that they are. So these are all things we go into more detail later as you learn more about my theories about the RPG model and such. But so kinesthetic is just, your spatial awareness and your movement and such, and really having this sense of how your body moves and how you move in relationship to things. So these are all things to keep in mind. Vestibular, keeping your balance. You feel on balance or off balance, right? It is a sense. If the little rocks in your ears get jammed, you'll start getting nauseous and motion sickness. And that can very interesting consequences. So as a game master, when you're describing a scene, they generally, unless there's something really overt, they tend to leave out a lot of the senses. So if it's a stinky, scum-filled area, they might talk about how putrid smelling it is or something. But try to more consistently just have a checklist of at least 2 or 3 senses besides sight that you're always trying to describe in a situation and scene to your players. And it helps people also further assess and be immersed in the circumstance with that extra data, right? They're able to imagine these other senses, and it can draw them in, and it can have some interesting results. Comments on that, Dan?
I was just thinking of, for example, with like real hunger. I mean, I guess that's visual as well, but also sense of characters.
Okay. All right. Shane?
One of the biggest things that especially lately, I've really been trying to incorporate in my DMing, because I'm a very smell reactive person, that I try and use that a lot because I think it helps add an extra sense of realism. It happens, I think, a lot of people in the background, but you don't really think about it until it's, you're dealing with monsters, and, something icky smelling might be left by this nasty monster, or
and
just an extra way to.
Yeah, it's a strong memory trigger for a lot of people too. The smell of your grandmother's home cooking or whatever, things like that, can evoke a very powerful emotional response or just cognitive response. So yeah, definitely an important one.
Area between.
It's one of it, because we include the other senses, it gets a little more complicated than that. But from the basic senses, yeah, it tends to need, like sight requires a ton of processing and literally goes through multiple phases of processing. Sound has to go through conversion as well and processing, and yeah, smell tends to be a little faster, direct. I mean, there's debate, but yes. Aislinn.
Yeah, I think that using all the senses is super important to games. I try to, with every interaction, incorporate at least one of each of the senses. So like you smell this, you see this, you hear this, and I go through the list because it makes it more real for the people who are playing.
Now you want to be careful that you keep the pacing, that you don't slow it down by doing too much of that all the time. But yeah, at the key moments, it really does enhance that experience, definitely.
Yeah, well, I meant for like the bigger interactions, like you meet your main villain, and this is what you see, hear, smell, taste, whatever.
Excellent. And over time, check out these other senses too, because they can actually really help enhance it in a more literally visceral way. Dina?
Yeah, I like the sensory experience, because sometimes it can be a lot. And it's like, oh god, because like if you're super immersed, you kind of like feel it a lot. Like if you walk into like a dank cave and you like brush upon like moss and you feel like you hear the squelching of your boots and you're like, oh god, I don't like this. Like,
Yeah, feel the
especially
wriggling, the wriggling stickiness of the spider webs as you brush against
yeah,
them.
like a little bit of ambience, like ugh, like oh god, I don't want to be here. But
I was
also,
actually wondering, are we talking dry moss or wet moss?
Excellent. Okay. Number 6, playing with the representations. So this is talking about where you look at the information that you've been given, and instead of just assuming that the information you've been given that's all there is to it, come up with different hypotheses about why the information is presented the way it is and what it may mean, so that you may have different meanings from the same facts. So you come in and you get all the stimuli information, and at first it may mean, oh, it's a dank, dark dungeon, that blah, 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 that's what you expect. And if you don't play around with that, you might miss that there might be other things going on here. Here's a fun little amusing story that Michael Martinez wrote in one of his things. A ranger and an elf are together camping out, and the elf makes a comment about, do you ever wonder about, or no, let's see, I have to get this right. The ranger says, what? I was noticing the sky. And the ranger looks up at the sky and looks at it and says, yeah. And the elf just kind of looking and looks at him expectantly, and the ranger looks back. The elf then says, what does that make you think about? And the ranger says, well, it makes me think about how small I am on this planet, and blah, 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 and all this. And the elf is like, And the ranger, feeling that wasn't quite the answer the elf was looking for, goes, well, and that the majesty of creativity, of creation, and blah, 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 just tries to make it even bigger. And the elf just kind of nods and goes, Finally, the ranger in frustration says to the elf, okay, fine. What does it mean to you? Well, to me, it means that someone has stolen our tent. Comments or questions?
oh my gosh. That sounds like a improv scenario. Like you're sitting there and then it's like, oh, all of a sudden it goes to that. So you have to you're like, okay,
but
we have to do, yeah.
But it's changing. It's looking at the stimulus and the data you're given from different forms of interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just completely changing your perceptual experience of it. And it's important, right? You come into the situation and you keep assuming this one way based on the stimulus that's there, and you're completely overlooking something really obvious, which we all do. We all like to make things more complicated often than it is. So it's important with this stimuli and stuff that people kind of stop and look at things from other perspectives. And then you as a GM, this can be fun for you because you can intentionally lay out these different stimuli in a way that looks like it's the same old, but in the right context, if your players switch gears a little bit and play around with it a little bit, you give them some really great clues that they might otherwise, not have. They just go on with the same old trope and the same old, and instead it could have a whole new experience. So just something to think about that can be fun to play with there. 7, continuous but not continual communication. So unless required by the situation, such as an emergency in an airplane cockpit or an emergency room, collaborators do not maintain constant communication. Instead, they develop a rhythm, a tempo, and a flow of information that prevents them from interfering with one another while assuring the events are proceeding on time. So, for example, we have 5 players at the table. We hope they are not all talking simultaneously. That is not, that is continual communication. That is not helpful. That's not really communicating effectively at all. But taking turns, doing the talking stick and going around and keeping that going and everybody getting, the rhythm and the flow going there, that works for the group. Number 8, formal and informal environments. This is less directly applicable unless we start talking about role-playing game professionalism and such. But that's clear lines of responsibility, but no restrictive boundaries. So this is also where we're going from. I mean, the diagrams I've talked about in other sessions. We're over here on the lower left. The DM and the facilitator is heavily in control, and the players and participants have very little freedom. They're heavily railroaded. And then slowly, as they build competence and understanding and skills, then you give them a little more freedom, and now they've got the training wheels, and you give them a little more freedom. Then you're working towards sandboxing, where they're calling the shots much more, and you're pretty much just creating a reactive environment. Collaborative relationships are not managed in the classic sense of the term. There isn't really a division of labor. There's no organizational chart in the small little group. Bigger companies there are, but usually you don't org chart your little team of 5 people. All collaborators have their special skills, but they need not restrict themselves to practicing their skills exclusively. They are free to consult, assist, and solicit ideas from other collaborators. So just the idea that you don't have to be, you have your clear lines of responsibility. The fighter is supposed to do this, the thief's supposed to do this, the cleric's supposed to do this, but you're not limited to that. And, you can pull from other resources and expand beyond. So we know who's responsible for what, and you can do more than that. That's the clear lines of responsibility, but no restrictive boundaries. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Number 10, decisions do not have to be made by consensus. Collaborators do not agree about everything. They can bicker and argue. Their arguments cannot be personal. They cannot remain so. This is critical for the health of your gaming group. Really, really critical. You can still have quarrels and disagreements, but not let it stop you from forging ahead. You can have consensus when possible, but there are times you're just going to have to go without consensus. You want to make sure that you get that as much as you can, but without it bogging everything down. So, like with RPG Research, I'm the founder and the president of the organization. I'm always asking everybody else for input and decisions. I go to the board, ask what the board wants, but I do have executive privilege, if you will, to overrule everybody and go, okay, thank you for your feedback. I'm going this way with it. I try not to do that. Generally, it's reserved for really quick situations that, again, this is that individual versus group thing where I need to just make an executive decision. Or if the group is just bogged down, nobody can agree, right? If there is not even close to consensus, there isn't even a majority, then I kind of have to just take the reins. And that's what's important to have leadership, because organizations don't have a leader to some extent. You don't want to dominate one. You want an authoritative, not authoritarian leader. You see committees that just get bogged down, never get anywhere. And so it's really important to have that you can keep moving forward without consensus, but you want to try to get consensus whenever possible. And you want to try to be respectful and considerate of all those other viewpoints as possible. That's back to the earlier number 4, was it? 3, mutual respect, tolerance, and trust. Right, that the experts and such need to respect their opinion, even if you. Number 11, physical presence not necessary. Well, we know that in this day and age. We've learned to do it. However, we have found that with gaming, you get more out of the physical presence of being there at the same table. Just as much as we try to enhance it with AR and VR and Roll20 and all these other tools that we use, the audio, video, it is not the same as physically being there around the table. It helps, but it isn't necessary. But you'll miss a lot when you're not there in person. Number 12, selective use of outsiders for complementary insights and information. So it's really easy for groups to get into groupthink and all think the same way and be completely wrong. And so it can be very important to do a sanity check outside. For example, the 1970s Stanford prison experiment with Zimbardo, who became president of the American Psychiatric Association. They all were in the study, and it was getting out of control, and he was commiserating to his girlfriend or something at the time, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, what are you doing? This is the most horrible thing I've heard. You have to stop this study immediately." And he's like, "Well, no, it's coming along, and this is interesting data." I'm like, "No, this is what you're doing is terrible." And but everybody was in that groupthink momentum there, and didn't really get that sanity check from the outside. And it's really easy for groups once they are kind of all on the same page. Millions of people can be wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's very important to check with outside sources when possible. In gaming context, this would be letting the GM have NPCs maybe let the players know, in some way, if they bother to ask, that maybe what the decision they've made or the direction they're going might not be the best route to take. Maybe it will lead to them being completely incinerated, and maybe they need to rethink their entire. And then finally, collaborations end. Collaborations are purposeful. Once the purpose is achieved, the collaboration usually ends. Now, in gaming, that totally depends if it's a one-shot, a multi-shot, or an ongoing campaign. So that will vary. But even in an ongoing campaign, you usually have specific milestones in your quest. And even when you finish that campaign, there might be another one and another one, but you still usually have some sort of specific start and end portions to it. Although more complex campaigns can start to have a lot of overlap and foreshadowing, multiple plots, and it gets more included. So those last few I was kind of hurrying through because I wanted to get a little bit further before we run out of time. So comments on those last few topics? Anybody? I'll start with Dina.
No.
Aislinn?
Nothing.
Okay, Dan? Shane?
Just one thing real quick on the selective use of outsiders. We're talking about gaming. Sometimes if, like, the group is missing something quite obvious and very dangerous to them, I'll make, an intelligence or wisdom check, because it seems to me that their characters were they actually there, wouldn't actually do something like this. And just to kind of get the group to reset and rethink maybe what they're doing.
Yeah, be in character. Nicholas Jiang? You're just still working on? Okay, good. So did you already pull all the wires that could be pulled? Okay. Okay, so you could start pulling a lot of the junk off the wireframe shelf. So I'm not set it out in that area there. Because there's a lot of crap on there. And I want to make that environment for you as uncluttered as possible. Just take everything off the shelves and kind of pile them over there by the green screen, but not on it so it doesn't pull down. I got to go through it, but I want to clear off those shelves completely and then just put back what actually needs to be in the room, in the server room there. Because there are tools and stuff that we need in there, but there's a lot of stuff that I got to go put somewhere else.
A lot of that.
I'm talking about the wireframe shelves. Yeah, a lot of what? Yeah. Oh. So these wireframe shelves here, like right behind the door there. There's the whole corner of wireframe shelves. That hole to the ceiling. No, not the server rack. Yeah, no, the wireframe shelves there. There's a ton of crap. Just kind of take everything off, kind of pile it over there, and that way I can go through it, and then we'll only put back what belongs in the server room. Does that make sense? Sorry about that, Ray. Okay, we're going to get into a little bit. This is all prologue to the actual forming, storming, norming, performing, but you need these concepts clear in your head for the rest of it to really come together. So this tends to be a two-parter typically. We do a lot of prologue and then actually jump into the meat of it. So the next part of it is the theoretical considerations. So a theory is a set of systematically interrelated hypotheses, premises, assumptions, facts, and observations pertaining to a particular phenomenon. A model is a representation of a thing, process, or phenomenon. So often the distinction between theories and models blurs, and some people use the two interchangeably. In our context, a model is distinguished by its representational nature. Theories, on the other hand, are considered to be more comprehensive and to be more concerned with the WH questions: who, what, why, where, and when, and how. I don't know why it's a WH question, but okay. Frequently, a theory explicitly or implicitly contains a model, and then the model serves as the capstone for the theoretical structure. So, why do we construct theories? Primary purpose is to organize, systematically interrelate the hypotheses, premises, assumptions, facts, and observations pertaining to a phenomenon. So we've got RPG theory and RPG model. The RPG model is kind of trying to create visual representations of different concepts within our RPG theory discussions. We want to move those books all down here so they don't get buried, because those are relevant. Oh, and Dan, can you get everybody logged into the logbook? Yeah. See. Theories, secondly, enable us to explain phenomena, right? Because part of, if your theory doesn't accurately predict things, then it's not an effective theory. You have to change your theory. Sorry, that was third, is the prediction. So the second one is explain it. The third one is predict. The fourth one is theories are said to be heuristic. That is, they serve to raise new questions and generate new hypotheses for testing. And finally, theories contain some mystery. They are premises, assumptions, and the hypotheses not verified but used nonetheless in the construction of a theory. So these are all important aspects of theories. They're often referred to as points of view. So theories of small, before I move forward, is everybody on board with that? Do you need me to clarify or elaborate on any of that? No, this is all related to scientific theory. This is still totally scientific theory. As opposed to theory versus law?
Yes.
Okay. In that is something that gets heavily misused by laypersons. Mm-hmm. So you hear about the Einstein's theory of relativity, something like that, as opposed to the law of gravity or law of thermodynamics and such. That is a little bit different way of organizing the progression of theories, because even laws have been overturned. They're still just, they're more accepted theory. They're all theories. And again, they're all points of view, and they're all ways of explaining a phenomenon. So we're using that in the more pure science perspective, because the law stuff is more political. And that's also, I mean, it literally becomes political and such. I mean, you look at how much Einstein overhauled Darwinian law, right? Because before Einstein, it was all the Darwinian model of the universe, which couldn't explain certain things. It had circular explanations. And Einstein's theories completely disrupted that, and they really poo-pooed it, right? All the Darwinian folks, sorry, not Darwinian, I'm sorry. Newtonian, thank you. Yeah. All the Newtonian folks were really suppressing other viewpoints and perspectives and really hurting the scientific process by not considering other theories, other perspectives, other ways of explaining similar phenomena. So we're talking about in the more purely scientific, not the kind of like, well, this is the law, this is the way it is. The debate is settled. Everybody agrees this is the way it is. Well, that's dangerous. That's not good science. Yeah. All right. So does that help as far as clarify that for you? Yeah. Anybody else questions on that? Okay. So theories of small group and team communication. So there's Burns' transactional theory. Was a classical child psychology study where found that institutionalized babies were dying at an unexpectedly high rate in spite of good nutrition and hygiene and in the absence of disease-causing agents. Investigation showed that the babies were not hugged, cuddled, rocked, or stroked, but when these tactile behaviors were instated, the babies began to thrive. I print up some more. All right. flip the back side of it and just write it on the back. So the spit study, Byrne took his motto, "If you are not stroked, you will shrivel up and die." So
No.
that's it. I'm just quoting here. So a stroke is a recognition of one person by another. It can be as simple as a hi, or a multi-word response, a smile or a wave, or the receiving of a word. An exchange of strokes is a transaction, thus the theory's name, transactional analysis. There are 4 types of verbal interactions whereby we may obtain strokes. Those are rituals, pastimes, games, and true intimacy. Again, according to Byrne's transactional theory. There are lots of other theories, of course. Just like there are lots of other theories besides, Tuckman's for social communication dynamics. In fact, just to be clear, Tuckman's theories of small group communication formation are really kind of very rudimentary, basic theories. There's a lot more elaborate and advanced theories out there, but I found out of all the other theories out there, the Tuckman one is easier for role-playing gamers to connect with and apply in their gaming situation without getting into a lot more complexity. There's already enough complexity here as it is, just so you know. So if you run into other people who say, why do you use Tuckman? Why don't you use such and such a theory? It's just because, well, there's lots of great theories out there. This is the one we've found being useful for people that can connect to in role-playing gaming concepts. So a ritual is an exchange of strokes that is repeated day after day from which no new information emerges. It's doing the same thing. It's your routine, right? And for some people, routine is very important. So, for example, the ritual is the hi exchange between people at the beginning of each group meeting. It can be more elaborate. Now the hi exchange is like, hi, Dan.
Hi.
Hi, Nicholas. Right? That's the hi exchange there. It can be a little more elaborate, like, hi, Dan, how are you?
How are you doing?
Exactly. The back and forth. Rituals may seem to be trivial and of no consequence, but imagine if no one said hi to you for a day or longer. You would begin to shrivel up. You could be traumatized. Now, some people might actually appreciate it, but for the most part, what's that?
I know a few.
Yeah, for the most part, though, that would be if you walked all around your school or building or whatever, saw all these people that you knew and recognized, and they just did not say hi to you at all. Think about how you would feel, right? What that would do, how isolated you'd start to feel. Number 2, pastimes are extended conversations from which new information may be forthcoming. So remember, rituals, there isn't new information. Pastimes, there is some new information that may be forthcoming, where there are no hidden agendas and where a climate of social acceptance remains. So, for example, the morning elevator conversations about the weather, or so remember when, and have you ever been to, things like that. Number 3, a game is a series of transactions in which one participant has a hidden agenda and wants to gain something from someone else without the others being aware of the motive. Now, this is very telling because that description of a game is based on game theory and is based on the limited perspective of game theory statement of a zero-sum game. But role-playing gaming breaks that mold, which post-dates game theory. Game theory came before role-playing gaming. Role-playing gaming breaks that model because it is a non-zero-sum game. So that breaks their little definition there. It's very important to realize that is a lot of role-playing gamers don't realize how strange and alien a concept it is to play collaboratively in a non-zero-sum game. It is an alien concept to most people. And the further you get away culturally from Western and people who get exposed to role-playing gaming concepts and such, the stranger it becomes as a concept. So even that definition right there tells you that it doesn't take into account the collaborative aspect. Now, that being said, the dungeon master typically does have a hidden agenda, right, with the story and everything else going on. Now, We hope that all of our game masters, the hidden agenda is not so hidden. Our agenda is we want everybody to have fun and have a great time. We want to see our players succeed. We want to see them challenged as much as possible, right to the brink of failure, have some failures that they bounce back from, but in the long run, have success and a wonderful time. That's what we ultimately want, a not so hidden agenda. And to get there, we have a lot of little hidden agendas along the way in the storyline, etc. But in a healthy gaming environment, you don't want that to be an antagonistic competitive environment between the DM and the players. There's too much of a power imbalance. When you see GMs who are competitive with their players, where it's always about the players trying to outsmart the GM and the GM's always trying to have the upper hand, those tend to be unhealthy groups. And when we read through Robin's laws of good game mastering, and one of the first things he says is all game masters are control freaks. And I have done plenty of polls, and that is not true. He's coming from a GURPS Steve Jackson Games 2001 perspective, his own perspective, because he says he's a self-avowed control freak. And I have met control freak GMs. I don't enjoy having control freak GMs, and I don't like to be a control freak GM. And I generally see those groups do not thrive as well. They may survive, they don't seem to thrive as well, because they're too much about being in control, and they have a lot of trouble giving up that control to the players. And the players need to feel that they have some political control. Now, there are players who will play for control freak GMs all the time, but it can really be dysfunctional. We just lost Aislinn there, and welcome back.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, the connection. It's best to reset the connection if it acts up at all. But let's see. And why do all of us, one time or another, become the mark or victim in a game? Because games provide strokes and bring about involvement, and involvement provokes emotional arousal, a state we often equate with meaningfulness. So, what does the research say about role-playing gamers versus non-role-playing gamers, and statistically how they are about meaningfulness, Dan? I've quoted this many times to you. You don't have to have the exact number, just ballpark it.
Read that to me.
What does the research say about the meaningfulness scores of role-playing gamers versus their non-gaming peers? These are college students and such who are so heavily tested. Do you remember these studies I've cited a few times? Okay, Shane, do you remember these studies?
Wasn't it like by a factor of 5 that people who played role-playing games were a lot more likely to score on meaningfulness than people who didn't?
That's related to the same. So there are studies that show that the suicide rate of role-playing gamers is 1/5 to 1/20 that of non-role-playing gamers. But that's a different study. The study I'm citing is from 91. I wrote a whole paper assessment about it, but they found that 40+%, I think it was 43, 47% of non-gamers scored high on meaninglessness. Only 17% of gamers did. That's a big difference. And also, psychoticism, which is a predictor of criminal behavior and other things, was much higher in non-gamers than in gamers. That's really remarkable. So when they talk about the meaningfulness and why do people play a lot of games, why do people play games where they get kind of abused and not mistreated? Because you hear this all the time. Whether it's a basketball game or a Monopoly game or whatever, in these competitive environments, there's going to be a loser. And you're going to take a beating emotionally in one way or another, and you're going to hope maybe you'll beat them next time, but you keep coming back for more. Why? Because it has emotional arousal, and we often equate that with meaningfulness.
Yeah.
But role-playing gamers don't have to take that emotional beating to be able to have this experience. Now, doesn't prove causality, but it's another interesting correlation. Before I go on to number 4, Aislinn, do you want to comment on any of that?
No, not really.
Okay. Dina?
No.
Okay. Dan? Okay.
Oh,
yes.
I did remember what you were
Yes.
talking about. It's just, I guess, the way kind of I was equating it to something else.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
No problem. Number 4, just remember the key word is meaninglessness and meaningfulness, either of those. So if there's a high level of meaninglessness, that's that 91 study I'm talking about all the time. Because there's only one study on gamers and meaninglessness. And so if it's meaningfulness or meaninglessness, that's the study. Number 4, in the state of true intimacy, communicating parties are involved and aroused without playing games. Here there are no hidden agendas, we hope, and we experience mutual joy. Sometimes in a group, for example, for no identifiable reason, everyone begins to giggle and laugh and just can't stop. This can be considered a state of mutual joy, a state of true intimacy. True intimacy does not refer necessarily to a romantic state, but it is a state that can occur between or among individuals. So in interactions, therefore, people obtain strokes in rituals, pastimes, games, and true intimacy. Again, according to Burns' theory of transactional theory here. And the model he uses to try to represent this is the PAC model, the PAC model. So he said that anyone at any time can communicate through one of 3 modes. P for parent mode, characterized by commanding, warning, moralizing, judging, analyzing, and interrogating. The adult A mode, characterized by tenuousness, possibility, allowing the other person to save face, civility, and affability. And the child or C mode, characterized by emotion, the positive emotions of joy and happiness, and the negative emotions of anger, rage, or tantrums. So in task group situations, we would expect group members to communicate primarily through the adult mode. Another theory is Gordon's effective communication theory. We won't go as deeply into this, but there's useful points. The effectiveness...
Hey, Hawk, real quick.
Yes, Shane.
I'm sorry. Could you define the adult part of that model again? I missed it.
You bet. Adult, so PAC model. Adult is characterized by tenuousness, possibility, allowing the other person to save face, civility, and affability.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
You bet. Anybody else want to comment or question on this section? Okay. So Gordon's effective communication theory. The effective listener may show effectiveness passively by just saying nothing, or may demonstrate active listening by giving the speaker feedback, which confirms that what the speaker said was heard. So a common technique is to echo or paraphrase what the speaker said. So, for example, the speaker says, "I began working here 2 years ago." The listener might reply, 2 years ago, eh? On the talking side, Gordon lists a number of ineffective talking strategies. Game masters and players pay attention to this. It's a pretty long list. In fact, I should probably add numbers to that. Let's see here. "12. And it's actually multiples with each line. Directing and commanding. Do this now. How do people respond to that? Especially when you're supposed to be working cooperatively and such. Number 2, warning, admonishing, and threatening. Now, I've had a number of talks with GMs recently with the players trying to warn them away from bad decisions or admonishing them after. Now, the warning thing is appropriate to do in like the real world where you don't want the kid to walk into the street and get run over. Warn them not to do that. In role-playing gaming, as we're GMing, one of the important things about role-playing gaming is it's a safe space to make mistakes. That we may not want to take those chances in the real world, but let's try them here. And I see all too often a lot of GMs trying to warn their players away from making bad choices. And unless the group has like constantly done that and had a lot of problems, figuring things out and they need more guidance, and you do get groups like that. Certainly some of the more dysfunctional groups need a little nudge. I found it's a lot more effective to not warn them away. You want to list the correct information. And if they ask what the potential possibilities are, if they need that defined to them, what the potential consequences might be of the different choices. But don't try to do it in a tone of, well, you probably shouldn't go that route because you'll make all the guards come after you. Which I hear GMs do stuff like that all the time. Instead, you should say something like, well, okay, so one of the options you're looking at is sneaking into there and stealing the bell. The other option you're looking at is this, and the other one's this. And the consequence of stealing the bell is, at 10 o'clock a.m. that somebody's out there to ring the bell. When the bell doesn't ring, all the guards might come running, etc. That's not warning them away. That's just letting them know the information that's available. They still have to make the cost-benefit analysis of which they're going to do. And you may be thinking as a GM, please don't steal the bell. That's a really bad choice. But you don't want to give that away for them. Let them explore that possibility. Let them screw up. This is the place to make mistakes and to learn from them. Again, just watch yourself now as you're GMing. Watch for the times that you're trying to guide your players away by warning them. And all it is an inflection of tone. You don't even have to change your words. Just like, are you sure you want to do that? Versus, are you sure you want to do that? Right? There's a big difference in the warning conveyed there. And I say, are you sure you want to do that? You sure you want to do it? Okay, all right, let's go and do that. Versus, are you sure you want to do that? Now the GM's really going, you don't want to do it, don't do it. So watch yourself, self-monitor for that. And again, it's not considered really effective because people don't learn as much when you keep warning them away from stuff. And then I, especially with our at-risk groups, really try to get GMs not to do that because they get that all day long, being warned away. Don't do this, don't do that. You should do that. You should watch out for that. You're going to get in trouble. Do you want to go to school? What's going to? They just get it all day long. That's the last thing they need. Let them experience the screw up themselves, and they will learn from it much more effectively than just another wah 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 wah. Number 3, exhorting, moralizing, and preaching. So now again, if it's in character, my God's the greatest and will save you all. Okay, that's appropriate for your character. But otherwise, yeah, be careful about that. Number 4, advising and giving suggestions. So the important thing there is, did they ask for a suggestion or being advised? If they specifically said, like A's then asked for a specific example, hey, I'm having a problem with these 20 plus players. Do you have any suggestions on what I could do to help improve the circumstances? The question wasn't, wasn't, so I gave feedback of, well, with that larger group, here's the challenges, try these things. I did not offer the unsolicited thing of, well, you shouldn't run a group that size, you should break it into smaller groups. They asked a very specific question. I tried to give very specific information to the question that was asked, not the unsolicited part of saying, well, you shouldn't do it that way anyway. That's going to be less effective than actually answering the question that was asked for the advisement. And I may have thoughts of like, well, maybe it's not such a good idea to run such a big group because you have the resource. But then again, it makes sense with the resources available. Sometimes that's all you can do. So, but that wasn't what the question that was asked. Number 5, lecturing and giving logical arguments. Now, again, in certain circumstances it's appropriate. We're doing a lecture here, but lecturing somebody and chewing them out and like, you're not thinking with your head. You need to logic this out and follow this way. What's the matter with you? Can't you think logically? Blah, blah, blah. That's not going to be an effective conversation there. Ineffective talking, definitely. Number 6, judging, criticizing, disagreeing, and blaming. Pretty straightforward there. Number 7, global praising. So isn't that interesting that he lists global praising as ineffective talking strategies? Number 8, name calling, ridiculing, and shaming. Number 9.
Hey, Hawk.
Yes.
I'm kind of. What do you mean by global phrasing? I'm kind of fuzzy on that.
Global praising. So.
Oh, praising?
Yeah. So like everybody here did a great job.
Gotcha.
So then number 9, interpreting, analyzing, and diagnosing. Again, depends on context. Number 10, reassuring and counseling, which is interesting. Number 11, probing, questioning, and interpreting. Number 12, withdrawing, distracting, and diverting. So one of Gordon's most basic rules for effective talking is to turn you messages into I messages. You guys are probably, any of you who've been through Therapy 101 have heard this. Like, instead of saying, you know, every time you do this happens, it ticks me off and blah, 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 blah. Instead saying, I feel really upset when, you know, and try not to turn it into a you. So For example, in a group, instead of saying, your idea is confusing, Gordon would recommend saying, I'm having a little difficulty understanding this idea. In like manner, instead of saying, we tried your idea years ago and it didn't work, an effective talker might say, we thought that was a good idea several years ago, but we were not successful with it. I wonder how we might modify it and see if it might work now. You might wonder what the big deal is about using the word you. The word you metaphorically points a finger at an individual and is often taken as an accusation. It seems to corner the other person. So we've talked about this, about separating the you of your character versus the you that's you, the player. Very important. People just automatically react to that you if they think it's personal as a personal attack, even though it's meant to be an in-character thing. And you have players who aren't careful about that and can cause a lot of animosity. You're like, no, do it in character. Keep it in character. Keep it in character. It really helps a lot. I statements are not accusatory and allow the other person to save face as a result. The end result is that communication is more likely to continue and be successful. And that's what he means by effective, in that the conversation can continue. Doesn't shut it down. That's the most important point. Is a lot of these others don't really allow for an ongoing conversation. They become one-sided.
Hey, Hawk.
Yes.
I apologize, but
You got to go.
I didn't write them down fast enough. I missed 8 through 11.
Okay. All right, we got. I guess we'll have to wrap it up in this section here in a few minutes. But number 8 is name calling, ridiculing, and shaming.
Okay.
Number 9 is interpreting, analyzing, and diagnosing. I just did. Number 10, reassuring and counseling. Number 11, probing, questioning, and interpreting. Number 12, withdrawing, distracting, and diverting. Because again, all of these stop having a conversation back and forth and between each other.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. We got just a couple minutes left. We have enough time. Let's see. We're not going to do the existential. Maybe Rogers. We got how many more of these? We got a few more of these. Finally, yeah. So this is the last section. That is the prologue to the actual communication parts of the forming, storming, norming, forming. Right. This is these theories are informing what we're going to talk about in those different stages. There's a few more pages of it which we won't be able to get through today. The next one is Dale Carnegie's influence theory. You guys may have heard of him from the famous How to Win Friends and Influence People from 1936. It's not really presented as a theory, but it's built on a number of assumptions and premises concerning communication for effect. So fundamental techniques in handling people. 1, don't blame other people. You could also interpret this as everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. That's another thing. Number 2, people desire to be important, so make them feel important. Number 3, phrase things toward your audience's point of view. So if I start going into technobabble mode and such, that doesn't help people understand what I'm saying. It's like down the acronyms and and don't start talking DHCP, TCP, IP, blah, 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 whatever. Exactly, static, exactly. Ways to make people like you. Number 1, become, because if you ever listen to the audio tapes, he says it like that, right? It's kind of funny. Number 1, become genuinely interested in other people. Really lean in, pay attention, and actually care about them. Number 2, smile. Make it till you make it if you have to on that. Number 3, remember that a person's name is the sweetest and most important sound in the world. Again, this is his concept. Number 4, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Oh boy, is that true. People will think that you are the best conversationalist if you're effective at getting them to talk about themselves. By asking good, short, terse, good questions relevant to about what they're interested in talking about. Number 5, talk in terms of the other person's interest. Just said that. Number 6, make the other person feel important and do it sincerely, not in a fake way.
Try to use
Yeah.
really think coming off as.
But part of it is a practice thing. Like sometimes you just have to fake it till you make it. Practice it. Yeah, you won't be good at it first. So as a dungeon master, as a game master, these are directly applicable skills. Now we tend to, as game masters, have to do a lot more of the talking. That's just part of the narrative process of it. Although some games are more sharing of that than others. So that can be a challenge. But as the players are talking and they're shaping their characters and their stories and stuff, really be interested in their character's background story, right? They're putting all this time and energy and emotion and thought into it. Instead of just going, yeah, whatever, yeah. Let them share their story. Let them have chances for their character. And we talked about this in Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering. Make sure you're taking turns that every character and every player gets a chance to shine each session, right? You need every session. Some people are going to have better opportunities than others, like because of what's going on that session. But try to make sure everybody's getting a chance each session. Don't let it go multiple sessions where somebody's just really not getting to do anything. If you notice that somebody slipped through the cracks in one session, go out of your way the next session to make sure they get to make up that. Without breaking the story and everything else. There's lots of ways to do it. So we got to wrap up here. Let's have final thoughts, comments, conversations, questions, and then we'll pick this up next time. So let me start first with Dina.
I have nothing.
Well, what was your experience of this overall?
Oh, it was very informative. Like I've never really thought about like the dynamic. Well, I've thought about like the dynamics and like the terms that like gamers throw around, but I've never thought about it like in this like more, I guess, psychological, sociological thing.
Yep, and we bring in neuroscience later too.
Ooh.
It all comes in over time. So yeah, it really will help you as these start to stick. When you're going to look at your games in a completely new way, and it's going to empower you to have much better control over your games in a positive way, not a control freak way. In a way, you have new awareness of all the dynamics going on, and it's just like learning the nuances of a game system. At first, you barely are muddling through the basics, and you're not really able to make the most of that game system because you haven't learned the additional nuances of how the game gets things accomplished. You manage to make it happen. You make the game happen. But as you get deeper into the system, you start to find all these other ways of looking at it and addressing things that make the game more robust. And it's the same thing just in general with these gaming dynamics. As you learn these other perspectives, and some of them you'll take and some cast aside, some will work for different people's styles. That's great. We look at a lot of different perspectives and we don't embrace all of them, but we think they're all important to at least have some exposure to. And it will hopefully help you just enjoy your game. Some people have commented, well, I'm worried that doing these lessons will ruin gaming for me, that I will always think of it in a therapy or psychological way and not be able to have fun. And to date, for doing this for decades, it is the opposite experience. It's not gonna ruin your fun having deeper understanding. It's going to enhance the fun because you're going to have just that much more awareness and nuance of the experience over time.
Like feel like art.
Yeah.
And a lot of them start learning, start thinking about it too, instead of what they've learned into what.
If it becomes that you have a wider tool set at your disposal, so you're no longer painting with two brushes, you now have a whole wide range to pick from. It's only going to enhance your experience. With my music background, musician and all that, and I didn't do theory until my mid-30s. I started playing when I was a kid, and I watched other instructors ruin music for people by loading them up with theory first and not letting them get to play. Now, again, the assumption here is you guys are already game masters and players, so I'm not teaching you role-playing gaming through theory. If you've never role-played before, this is not the session to attend, right? I would not do this to a new player because they're just be like, I don't get it. This makes no sense to me. We have the exact opposite where we try to get them playing as soon as possible and worry about the rules and all that as they play. Aislinn, comments last comments, thoughts, comments, etc. Questions?
No questions, but this was a really interesting lesson.
Good.
I think it'll help me look at the way things work in the future, and it'll definitely help me get out of like DMing slumps.
Oh,
For sure.
Oh yeah, these tools will totally, exactly. That's one of the best benefits to these. And this is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. Good. I'm glad you found that useful. Shane, you've been doing this a little longer. What were your thoughts and comments?
Well, I don't know if it's just the format that we went through or whatever, but I really pulled a lot out of this one this time. Both, I was looking at this really introspectively, some things that I feel like I'm doing really well, and some things that, honestly, I think I kind of need to change immediately for a lot of reasons. But this was a great session. I mean, I've got 8 pages of notes here, lots of really good stuff, and I really appreciate that. I think this is one of the better sessions we've ever done, at least from my perspective.
That's because you've missed most of these sessions. Shane, I've been telling you this for a while. Like, Shane, you keep missing the meaty sessions.
Well, I mean, even the other educational ones that I've done with, I feel like this one, I don't know, maybe I was just more receptive today. I just feel like I took in a ton of really good stuff today, and I really appreciate it.
That also could just be the layering effect, because when you first get exposed to a lot of this, it's really hard to take it all in. But you've been getting it bit by bit so that you can now go even deeper with it because you've been exposed to it multiple times. So,
well, yeah, and since I've gotten with you guys, I've been looking at game mastering in an entirely different, instead of just like going out and doing it, I'm like in the back of my mind, almost looking at it from like a research perspective, and I think it's really helping me get much better, much faster.
Good. That's the whole goal. We're hoping that if you do a year or two of this, part time, it will save you decades of trial and error. That is we can't promise that, but that is always the goal, because we want to get people able to run these games as quickly as possible, as efficaciously as possible. So that's great to hear, Shane. I'm glad to hear that. Dan.
I'm always good to always repetition helps.
Yeah, helps more of it stick, get a little more nuanced, deeper understanding. Yep, wonderful.
And, having more people further.
Good. Yeah, no, that's why I want this to be. I record the videos. You can always go back and look at the videos, but that's why it's so important. Everybody keep attending each week the in-person sessions, and that we have larger attendance numbers. Some people want to just go ahead and just watch the videos of the previous ones. Well, you miss out on that whole back and forth and your own unique questions that you're going to have come up. Now, again, when you're watching the recorded videos, feel free, if you're on the RPGSN, the Role Playing Gamer Social Network that we have, to comment away. Say, hey, I was watching this video and I didn't hear anybody bring up this comment. This is a thought I had. Post it so we can have that conversation, or write it down and save it for your next training session to say, hey, Hawk, I was going through my training and there was this whole conversation, and either I completely disagree, or I didn't understand, or this thought occurred to me. Bring it up at your next training. It's really important to have this back and forth so that it is a personal experience that way. So thank you very much for everybody making it. I'm glad you made it here on Memorial holiday. And so tonight we're not doing, I gotta let the artist know, the other artist who was going to show up tonight, we're not doing the Applied Gaming Star Trek Adventures, because we had so many people not able to make it because of the Memorial holiday weekend. And you have to be here in person for the new game Sundays from 6 to 9, because it's not stuff that we have online like the other game sessions we can do. So next week, this is Applied Gaming, and we'll be doing basic D&D at the expert level. That we can do with remote players, because the resources are readily available online. The Star Trek Adventures one, they're not readily available, so that's something you have to come in person to play it. So tomorrow, after the talk show from 4 to 5, 6 to 7 is administrative meeting. 7 to 10 is also going to be a theory session, and it depends on who shows up. So, for example, if all of you show up tomorrow, then we would just continue this conversation. But generally, we have it geared that people can only make Sundays, only make Mondays. So, for example, Dan, you can't make Mondays now. Or no, you can do Mondays, you can't do Thursdays. We don't do Thursdays anymore.
One in the fourth week.
Yeah. But for example, tomorrow, if let's say the three of them showed up and you didn't show up, you've been through this enough, I can continue. But if none of them show up, then we would cover a different topic, depending on who shows up and what their knowledge base is at. But otherwise, the plan is in 2 weeks from now, we would continue. I've got a little bookmark in here. We'd continue exactly where we left off, but make a note of where we left. Who is planning to attend tomorrow's theory session? Okay, Dan?
Yeah, I should either I'll be there physically or remotely, one way or another.
All right. Dina?
I can.
It's not required. Remember, generally you're only expected to do one session a week. It's designed that way. You only need to do one a week. For those who want to accelerate the process, they're welcome to do more.
I'm gonna have some trouble attending for the next couple of weeks because I have graduation in 2 weeks, and next week I have Lilac City Comic Con.
Understood.
So
totally.
it's gonna be hard for me to tune in.
Don't stress
and
about
then,
it at all.
Yeah, but I'll tune in and I'll watch the videos even if I don't end up actually attending the meeting.
Okay, but do keep in mind the content of the meeting is shaped by who attends. So, for example,
but it's always good to listen in.
Yeah, definitely. Like if it had been John and Danielle and stuff, we wouldn't have gone over this because I've already gone over this multiple times with them. So, who shows up helps shape the topics we cover. I've got a huge repertoire to choose from, and then I shape it to who's here. Okay, so that's then. So next week though, it will be applied gaming. So it'll be basic D&D. We've been introducing people to BECME, Basic Expert Companion Masters Immortals. So we'll be continuing that next Sunday and Monday from this 1 to 4 o'clock slot on Sunday and then 7 to 10 o'clock slot on Monday next week. Also, those of you here in Spokane, I can't emphasize this enough. This Friday, May 31st, please bring yourself, bring your gamer friends, bring everybody you can that's willing to sign a waiver, a media waiver. We need to get as many people to show up this Friday, May 31st from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. up at Sky Prairie Park up here on 5 Mile Prairie. We've got to get some photos and videos for our website and our catalog, our trifold brochures, etc. We've really, a lot of stuff we have is very old. Really need to get representative of the programs. The problem is we do a lot of great programs, a lot of people, we can't use them because a lot of them are protected populations. So we need to create some representative media kit to do this, to solve a lot of, for our fundraising and everything else. We need a minimum of 20 people to show up this Friday. Minimum. And it'd be a lot better if we were around 30, 40 people. So please, if you attend nothing else this year, please come this Friday, May 31st, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. up at Sky Prairie Park in 5 Mile. You should already know. Dina, you're new to you don't have email set up, but you'll be getting a reminder of that soon. Where are you located, Dina? Are you in Spokane area or somewhere else?
I'm in Redmond, Washington.
Okay,
other side of the state.
Yeah, you're too far away for that. This will be everybody. About half of our staff are in the Spokane area, and then the rest are scattered across 5 continents. So this just applies to those who are in the area.
Although if you can make it.
Yeah, I mean, if you can make it, great, but I understand. My fiance does that commute all the time, but but yeah, I don't expect you being in Redmond to do that. But everybody else that's in the area, please, just 2 hours of your time. It would really help us so much. So please try to plan on that. And again, if you can bring extra, yes, Aislinn.
Are you gonna have printed copies of the waivers for us to sign?
Yes.
All right, because I think I can bring a little group of people, but we do not have printers.
No, we literally have a full color LaserJet printer copier in the bus.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're a full 2 mobile gaming rooms on wheels with everything that you need for gaming.
That's wicked cool.
So, and you will get to see both the bus and the trailer in person too when you show up. We will be doing, very short representations of what we do, of tabletop, of LARP, of drum circles, all the activities, the electronic gaming, the VR. I'm bringing my VR and AR equipment. I'm going to bring it all, and because we're going to be doing lots of. I'm going to be shooting all these photos. I was a professional photographer back in the 90s, and so we need to get everybody. And yeah, it'll be staged, but we need the bodies to show people what we do, because describing it, people don't understand. People get the visuals, and So it'll be a great chance to try all these things out, and there will be pizza and beverage and stuff too. So that helps people.
Should I bring my drum?
If you have a drum, bring it. Yeah, we've got enough for
Okay.
We've got enough for 50 people. But if you have a favorite, bring it.
Yeah, because I play the drums pretty regularly, but I got a small one.
What do you have?
A djembe.
Excellent. Yeah, we got half a dozen djembes of different sizes. So great, bring your own.
Yeah, I'll just bring mine.
Wonderful.
Doesn't hurt.
No, it'll be a lot of fun. And if the weather is inclement, then we put that stuff, in the trailer of the bus to shelter it. And then there's shelters up at the park too. So we'll make it all work. All right, wonderful. Yeah, bring anybody you want. Again, as long as they're willing to sign waivers, it'll be great to have the extra people. All right, everybody have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful rest of your Memorial holiday. Remember what this holiday is about for those of us here in the U.S. and such, and was in World War II, basically, any of these. But thank you, and those of you watching the stream, wherever you may be well, happy gaming, and namarie. Then we go around, each person does their little parting statement. Aislinn?
Bye.
Dita?
Goodbye.
Shane?
Thanks for playing.
All right. Everybody kind of eventually over time comes up with their own parting statements. And we stop recording.